Sure, you can start.
Hello, Vanakkam, Namaste, and welcome to the Indology Festival organized by Tamil Heritage Trust. We are greatly encouraged by the response that we've had for this event, the number of registrations that we've had for this event, the interest that people have shown, the response that you've given. And we hope that you will be with us for the next 5 days while we run the Indology Festival and participate in all the talks that we will be having over the next 5 days. Before we start the day one programs, I would like to start with a brief introduction to Tamil Heritage Trust and its activities. Tamil Heritage Trust is a not-for-profit, volunteer-driven organization that is primarily based out of Chennai. The objective of the trust is to improve the understanding, appreciation, dissemination, and celebration of India's rich cultural heritage. Towards this, we conduct multiple programs, the first of them being the monthly heritage talks. So every month during the first Saturday, we conduct a talk on any of the aspects of India's cultural heritage. This could be about temple architecture, this could be about archaeology, epigraphy, art, literature, numismatics, history, music, dance, prehistory. The people who have come and spoke at our monthly lectures include both experts from various fields and also amateurs or serious enthusiasts, as you may want to call them. So we provide a platform for both serious enthusiasts as well as experts to come and share what they've learned under various fields of Indian heritage. All our programs, including this one, are available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which is Tamil Heritage Trust. So if you want to continue watching our events, please go to YouTube and click subscribe on our Tamil Heritage Trust channel so that you're able to receive notification of our future events. We also conduct intense workshops with the general public. Again, these are heritage related. Some of the workshops that we run include how to see a temple, how do we improve our appreciation of seeing a typical temple. We do workshops on museum appreciation. We also conduct workshops on Pallava Grantham, which is the lipi that is used in several inscriptions, including the inscriptions that are there in Kanchipuram and Mamallapuram. Unlike our monthly lectures, which are on various topics, there is a Pecha Kacheri that we run, which is a 2-day seminar that we run typically in the month of December. These are a series of lectures centered around a topic. For example, we ran a Pecha Kacheri on the art and architecture of Mamallapuram. This was called Pallava Mallai, which we ran in 2016. We ran another Pecha Kacheri in 2019 for the Pandyan art and history. Likewise, we run this since for several years, since 2011. Our last Pecha Kacheri, which was held in January of 2022, was a 2-day program where we had 10 lectures on the art and architecture of Orissa. These were lectures that were in Tamil. The program was called Kalingam, and we had lectures on Orissa's heritage through temples, inscriptions, history, and archaeology. So it is a central topic that we take, and we have a series of lectures. Another program that we conduct every year is what we call a site seminar. Every year during the month of January, we visit a heritage site within India, or a group of heritage sites within India. But more importantly, before we visit the site, we spend around 3 to 4 months together as a group and prepare ourselves to visit the place. We do research about the place through internet, through books, through various reading material that is available, give PowerPoint presentations to the group that is traveling, so that when we travel to the place, we are able to go there as well-informed people and not just as mere tourists. We have been doing these site seminars ever since 2010. Our last site seminar was in 2020. As you can see, we have had these visits to Mamallapuram, Ajanta, Pudukkottai, Srirangam, Gujarat, Tirunelveli, Chalukyan monuments in Badami, Pattanakkal, Aihole, Orissa, Kanchipuram, Madhya Pradesh, Tanjavur and Kumbakonam, which was our last site seminar. These are some pictures that we took from our past site seminars. We also engage with various teachers around Tamil Nadu, where we train them on various aspects of Indian heritage, temple architecture, so that these teachers can become ambassadors of heritage within their school, and they are able to disseminate this knowledge to the children studying in those schools. So this program, Teachers for Heritage, is also called Alamar Avai, where we trained several teachers predominantly in Tamil Nadu on several aspects of temple architecture, art, sculptures, and so on. The Tamil Heritage Trust also instituted a THT Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award. We have been instituting this award ever since 2020. This award is given to an individual who has done significant work in the field of history or heritage preservation, dissemination, and research. So you can see pictures of us, Professor Swaminathan, awarding this to Madhusudanan Kalechelvan in 2020 and Professor Shankararan in 2020. In addition, this year, we are also instituting a new award. This is called the THT V. Venkaya Epigraphy Award. Tamil Heritage Trust is collaborating with Mrs. Sunita Madhavan, who is the great-granddaughter of Sri V. Venkaya. Sri V. Venkaya was an epigraphist who lived in the 19th century. He has done pioneering work in epigraphy, and he was the first Indian epigraphist for the government of India. So the award is being instituted in his name. The award is meant to recognize individuals who have contributed towards either discovering unknown inscriptions or interpreting or reinterpreting our existing inscriptions, or disseminating the information that is contained in these inscriptions. You will find more details of this award. There is an announcement that is there in tamilheritage.in. You can go to this website and find out more details of the award. If you wish to nominate a suitable individual, or if you'd like to nominate yourself, the last date for submitting nominations is the 19th of June. We conducted our first Indology festival in the year 2020. This was a week-long festival that included scholars from not just from India, but from around the world, speaking about various topics on Indology, ranging from Indian prehistory, early history, Indian mathematics, temple architecture, Chola bronzes, and so on. That was our first Indology festival. It was an online conference that we conducted. And here we are celebrating our second Indology festival in 2022. So, temple builders of medieval India, that is the topic of this festival. So why do an Indology conference on medieval India? Well, we all learn history in school. What do we learn? Predominantly when it comes to Indian history, we learn about Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Indus Valley civilization. And then we read in detail about the great emperor Ashoka. Maybe a little bit of Gupta, sometimes we read about Gupta. But then after that, when you blink your eye, you find yourself reading all the way to the 13th century, where we start reading about the Delhi Sultanate. It is almost like traveling forward in time in our historic period, or it is like pressing a fast forward button. From Ashoka, you go all the way to the Delhi Sultanate. But there are several kings, kingdoms, and dynasties that have ruled several parts of India. Some large dynasties, some small dynasties, some popular, some less popular dynasties. This is what we call the early medieval period, the 8th to 13th centuries. The early medieval period in Indian history has been acknowledged as a defining and transformative phase in many ways. This period saw the emergence of hundreds of royal families and dynasties that ruled over regional and local states. These kingdoms presided over a phase of renewed urban development, supported by a sound agrarian economy. While temple building was known from much earlier times, it is during this period that kingdoms across India began to extend their patronage to the building of monumental temples. It is these temples, these monuments that we today treasure as India's cultural heritage, and we really cherish them. So this year's Indology Festival, Tamil Heritage Festival, focuses on the India from the 8th to the 13th centuries, when these trends in temple building were well established. So what we've done is we've invited a galaxy of distinguished scholars to share their insights on the emergence of the royal dynasties of this period, their influence on the political, economic, and geography of the land, and highlight their contributions to art and architecture by showcasing select temples from this period. You will find that over the next 5 days, we have Saturdays and Sundays we have 4 lectures, 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening, but the rest of the days we have 2 lectures each in the evening. We will highlight as many dynasties, big and small. That is our endeavor here, from across the length and breadth of this medieval India, as was permitted by the time available. We encourage you to join us and be part of this 5-day Indology Festival and celebrate the contribution that was made by these medieval India kingdoms. To begin with, we have our inaugural address by Professor Swaminathan. Professor Swaminathan doesn't need an introduction to the Tamil Heritage audience, but I'd like to introduce him for the benefit of people who may not be familiar with him. Professor Swaminathan was a professor of the mechanical engineering at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi for more than 30 years. He retired as a professor. He also worked in the Center for Rural Development at IIT Madras, Bharat Gyan Vigyan Samiti, Delhi, as the National Coordinator for Watershed Development and Integrated Rural Technology Center, Palakkad, Kerala. He has made a very detailed study of Ajanta paintings. His lectures on Ajanta are especially popular. His favorite topics include Indian music, Sanskrit, ancient Tamil literature, Tamil prosody, development of scripts, Gandhian philosophy. The other major work by Professor Swaminathan is the story of scripts, where he dives deep into Sumerian, Egyptian, Chinese, Indian, Mesoamerican, Korean, Tibetan, and Siddhan scripts and calligraphy of Arabic. Professor Swaminathan has written a popular coffee table book on Mamallapuram. He is also the co-founder of the Tamil Heritage Trust. I now request Professor Swaminathan to deliver his inaugural address.
Dear friends, Vanakkam to all. It is my pleasure to inaugurate this year's IndoFest of Tamil Heritage Trust. India conjures up a vision, among other things, a land of lofty places of worship. Khajuraho and Buddheshwara temples are icons of Indian creativity. Started as modest cave temples, just simple excavations in living rock, the worshipping places then became independent as standalone sites, made enormous strides in both size and art. The apogee was reached by the Golden Guptas. The period that follows was also momentous. The area was that of the whole of Indian subcontinent, spilling over to the neighboring Southeast Asia. This is a typical case of unity and diversity. The present festival is to bring out to our memory and celebrate the great interlude between the Guptas and the Delhi Sultanate. 14 distinguished speakers from across the country will bring alive and explore the emergence, the reign and legacy of different dynasties, their influence on political, economic, and sacred geography of the world, of the land. The complete history of Indian art is still not understood. It is very original, rich in independent creations and tendencies. The very first thing we may ask ourselves is whether it is prudent comparing the art with other cultures, the Western and the Chinese, for example. This does not mean that our art grew out of nothing and that there was no understanding and assimilation of neighboring civilizations. Yes, a comparison is useful to make tentative judgments and arrive at theories for studying and compiling our history. Art is a fundamentally important activity of man, but its manifestations are myriad, highly influenced by its own philosophy and also by its literature, fine arts, and performing arts. A deeper understanding of these facets of creativity is important. We can construct to some extent the art of Indus civilization, but nothing could be gleaned from the later period, namely the period of Vedas. It is possible to trace back many aspects of our thinking to this epoch of extraordinary philosophical and spiritual insight. But art and architecture, important fields of human activity, a subject of our present venture, evodes the part played by this important period of our civilization. Yes, from the time of Mauryan rule, we are able to follow the outline of our history. We may discern its development as originating in a world imbued with a deep religious feeling, starting initially as an expression of Buddhist faith. Following its weaning in the country of its birth, it became Hindu and Jain, with the former being predominant. Later, it became influenced by the Muslim thought and mentally transplanted to Indian soil. It definitely contributed synthesis of the Indo-Muslim schools. It may be worth noting that the southern end of the peninsula, the Tamil country, had different idiom of literature to start with, and is similar to the Vedic times in terms of the non-existence of physical remains of architecture, making it difficult to reconstruct the art and architecture of the period. By the post-Kalabara period, we can glean that it amalgamated with the rest of India. The result of it can be its splendid contribution to Indian culture. It can be seen that the mainstream is an excellent example, as I said before, unity and diversity. All along, it has been extremely rich and consistent, yet there has been variations. One can see the persistence of certain figurative symbolic characters in spite of the social and political upheavals. The conquest of Southeast Asia can be attributed to its vibrant and dynamic nature. From the beginning, there has been consistent attempts to give shape to abstruse metaphysical concepts. These are imbibed in the cultural and social atmosphere of India. All along, the divine and the human are intertwined. It is intelligible only to scholars who possess the key to the interpretation. For these reasons, its understanding and interpretations are problematic for lay, though curious Indian mind, but completely evaded the pioneers, mostly Europeans. This can easily be understood. But a childlike curiosity can be discerned in their work. Indian iconography took most unusual course. Pursuing its aims are completely alien to the rationalizing mentality of the majority of mankind. Obviously, an unfathomable gulf separates the Indian cult images from those of other religions. They appear to be more like instruments of magic than work of art. There is no doubt that the high aesthetics is achieved in the depiction of divine icons, like presenting Durga with the 10 arms, Shiva with the 5 faces and 4 arms with the strange weapons, and the solemn demeanor of the meditating Buddha. But the question is, what do these signify? Are they simply illustrative of sacred texts? These are sacred images simply celebrative figures and are more mere objects of veneration? Our scholars of philosophy tell us that these help in achieving reading godliness through profound mystical concentration. Often yoga means this kind of mental activity, leading to an advanced stage of divine ecstasy. There has been doubts about the creative element in our art. The images are products of rigid, precise rules. It is felt that these are chained to textual description and iconometry that dictated poses, symbols, proportions, and colors. This reflects the typically Indian inclination towards the treatise and the system. Would all these give scope for creative genius of the artist and the early historian wondered? Aren't these limitations and the discipline the very source of power? Is the counter. It may be difficult to appraise these works apart from the religious values attached to them in addition to their intended purpose of performing a link between the human and the divine. It should be understood that these aspects alone do not constitute all there in Indian art. The unique way of associating the divine and the human in the Indian society is clearly reflected in the narrative compositions, in the ornamentation, and in all that speaks directly to the beholder's mind. In this manner, the human element preserves its weight, and the artistic creation remain indissolubly bound to the real life that inspired them in many different ways. Some works are even seem to have been prompted by purely aesthetic motivations. Now, coming to the essential feature of these edifices, who have actually created these marvels? To whom do we give credit? The kings have been patrons, without whom these could not have been created. But it was only their show of power and simply vanity that prompted them to commission these edifices. There are unsung heroes. These are the anonymous makers who went through decades of apprenticeship, studied scriptures, imbibed bhava to transfer this through yogic meditation to inanimate materials and expected nothing more than spiritual satisfaction. One more thing, while celebrating our art treasures, let us not forget that these were not created as art objects at all, but for a loftier ideal, as sacred objects for contemplation, meditation, and spiritual focus. Ignorant of all these metaphysical, spiritual, and philosophic significance, we can look at the art component alone. This is our inadequacy. The Tamil Heritage Trust is very happy to direct our attention to a period of great significance in our history. We will all be sharing our treasures together. I am hoping there will be more such occasions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Swaminathan. This definitely sets the tone and reflects the spirit of our 2022 Indology Festival on the temple builders of medieval India. With that, we go to our next talk, the keynote address that is going to be delivered by Dr. Keshavan Veluthat. I'd like to give a brief introduction of Dr. Veluthat. Dr. Veluthat received his undergraduate degree from National Council for Rural Higher Education, graduate degree from the University of Calicut, Kerala in 1974, MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University in 1978, and doctoral degree from the University of Calicut in 1987. Professor Veluthat started his career as a Kerala Government Service College teacher in 1975. In 82, he moved to the newly formed Mangalore University. He retired as professor and chairman of the Department of History in 2008. He also served as a professor of history at the Delhi University. Professor Veluthat was a visiting professor at the Practical School of Advanced Studies in Paris, the House of Human Sciences in Paris, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala, and the University of Hyderabad. He is a lifetime member of the Indian History Congress. He was also associated with the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAAC, in assessing universities and colleges across India. Professor Veluthat's area of specialization is the early medieval period of Indian history with a deep focus on South India. He is also an epigraphist. He knows Sanskrit, Tamil, and Kannada apart from Malayalam and English. He has authored and edited around 16 books and monographs and contributed innumerable essays and papers in several prestigious journals. The topic for his keynote address is the early South India in transition. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Veluthat to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you. Esteemed friends, I am extremely grateful to my friends in the Tamil Heritage Trust for asking me to participate and give a keynote address in this online Indology festival with temple builders of medieval South India, 8th to 13th centuries as the topic for this year's edition. I take that this is more to encourage me to study the temple more seriously than recognizing my work in the field, for I have done very little work on temple building. However, from the limited reading and research I have done on early and medieval South India, I have been convinced that the temple, which pervades the landscape of the region, is not something that was always there. It emerged at a particular historical conjuncture, and the processes of and factors behind reaching that conjuncture have to be understood in trying to understand the temple. I presume to look at these in this paper. There are two problems which I seek to address in this presentation. In the first place, I seek to locate an early historical phase in South Indian history, a clearly identifiable formation which came into existence closely following its pre- and proto-historic periods. Received historiographical tradition calls this period the Sangam Age. It is appreciated differently in recent years. Now, in fact, there is a school of thought which believes that the expression Sangam Age is a misnomer. Second, we try to identify the next definite phase in the historical process with structures, ideas, and institutions which are entirely different from what obtaining under the preceding formation. This is the period represented by the first monarchical states culminating in the Chola Empire with its impressive and durable political institutions, as well as the spectacular mementos which it left behind. We then seek to raise the question relating to the process of transition from the one formation to the other. In this rather long passage could be located what has been described as the Calabra interregnum. The later Sangam texts, including the twin epics, the rise and growth of huge agrarian corporations, the emergence of the temple, the Bhakti movement, the domination of Brahmanical institutions, and the conditions for the establishment of the monarchical states under the Pallavas and Pandyas. We attempt to find out the forces that led to the breakup of the earlier formation and brought about the new one. Abusing the license offered by this platform, one may also venture to make a statement or two regarding the causalities involved, even though there is a risk of oversimplifying an extremely complex process. The question of labels could be taken up here if that is necessary. The early historical period of the Deep South, which followed the prehistoric period, witnessed the emergence, maturing, and dissolution of a clearly identifiable social formation. It was more or less coterminous with the beginning of the Iron Age in this part of the country. Iron itself appears to have, as it were, arrived in South India without a preceding Copper Bronze Age or a Chalcolithic Age. While the implications of this jump, a double promotion as it were, are very serious, we do not take it up as it is beyond our scope in this presentation. Historians assign a variety of sources to this period. The megaliths and their furniture, the hero stones, the Tamil Brahmi cave labels, the early Tamil anthologies called the Sangam texts, punch-marked coins, references in the Arthashastra and Ashokan edicts, and an occasional sherd of northern black polished ware, Greco-Roman accounts and the archaeology and numismatics of Roman presence, and so on. An impression of a glorious civilization, which lasted for a few centuries with no substantial change, is created by historians from V. Kanagasabhai to N. Subramanian. That historiography has also been responsible for looking at this civilization as representing the classical period of South Indian history, which rubbed shoulders with the Roman Empire, with which it had extensive trade relations. Recent writings, however, do not entertain such a conceit. The work of scholars such as K. Kailasapati, Kamil Swelabil, George L. Hart III, R. Champakalakshmi, M.G.S. Narayanan, Rajan Gurukal, and others has made a more realistic appreciation of the sources, placing them within a perspective derived from a combined use of the social sciences. Our understanding of the social formation there is indebted to the work of these scholars. The period of about 1,000 years or more, represented by the above categories of sources, is not anymore looked upon as a single unchanging entity. On the other hand, it has been more profitably considered as representing various stages in the biography of a social formation, its emergence, maturing, and dissolution. This period was characterized by different forms of production, different ways in which humans sought to relate themselves to nature in their struggles for livelihood. One of these forms, however, tended to dominate. That world is best represented in the early anthologies of Tamil literature known as the Sangam literature. Considered formerly as constituting a single corpus of literature, these texts are now recognized as composed over a vast period of more than a millennium and belonging to different strata. They are essentially bardic compositions exhibiting the traits of oral poetry. They were selected, thematically arranged, and brought together at a much later date in a highly disciplined manner. It was probably at this point in time that a text of grammar and poetics was composed. The rigor involved in the collection and unity and discipline of the grammatical work and later editions were among the factors responsible for identifying all these songs as belonging to a single corpus and their period as relatively short, representing a single undifferentiated period in history. It is now recognized that of the various groups of anthologies known as Ettutogai, Pathupattu, and Padanankikanakku, 6 anthologies of the first, excluding Kalitogai and Paribadal, are the earliest. They use an interesting floral symbolism in the nomenclature of what is called Thinais, and this is standardized and theorized in the later works of poetics. Each one of these Thinais signifies primarily a poetic situation and context in the literature and its poetics, representing generally particular expressions of war and love. Of the Thinais, a grouping of 5 is of particular interest to the historian. The 5 Thinais of the Aham group represent a division of the physiographic region of the Tamil-speaking world into 5 different ecozones. Thus, the 5 Thinais of Kurinchi, that is hills and forests, Mullai, that is pastures and thickets, Marudam, riparian plains, Palai, parched lands, and Neithal, coastal tracts, represent clearly distinguishable geographical zones. People who lived in these zones lived an appropriate life close to nature. The hunters and gatherers of Kurinji worshipped the Cheyon, the war god. The pastoralists of Mullai had their bucolic god in Mayon. The plough agriculturists of Marudam prayed to Vedan, the rain god. The fierce robbers and fighters of Palai propitiated the bloodthirsty Kottravai, and the fishermen of Neithal knelt before Kadalon, the sea god. It goes without saying that the greatest potential for development was enjoyed by the Marudam plains, where there was plough agriculture. This was the potential on account of the fertility of the soil and the availability of water, holding out the prospect of a veritable agrarian revolution. Labor employed for production was largely kin-based, and so were all the relations. Kutis or households and Ur or clan settlements were the units of social organization. This division into different Thinais did not, to be sure, involve any watertight division of any kind. Transitional situation, including merger or overlap of more than one Thinai, are spoken of in what is called Thinai Mayak. The picture available is of a society in which people pursued their livelihood by following different ways of production. In transitional situations, their livelihood by following in transitional situations, ways more than one obtained at the same time in the same place. As to the relations of production in these different ecozones, the information is clear. The principle of organization was kinship. This is visible in situations of pastoralism and agriculture. In fishing too, we have evidence of descent groups not only participating in production processes, but also handing down skills of the trade from generation to generation within the same descent group. In such a system of production, distribution of surplus among the various factors of production is irrelevant. In any case, production was largely for subsistence and hardly for surplus. The picture provided by archaeology too is complementary. In the megalithic horizon, which corresponds to this literature both chronologically and culturally, human settlements are sparsely distributed. Sites throwing up evidence of settled agriculture, if few and far between, are nonetheless noticed with continuous occupation from Neolithic levels. Iron is indeed present, but the implements show a marked bias to hunting and fighting to the point of a near total exclusion of iron technology in agriculture. Artifacts such as pottery, terracotta, beads, semi-precious stones, bronze objects, etc., besides the iron implements, point to the level of craft production which had a place in the economy. But it is questionable if there was any concern with surplus even here, for such exchange as we have was not, as might be conventionally understood, a disposal of surplus. The supplementary sidelight provided by the Tamil Brahmi cave labels illumines the picture further. They speak of certain varieties of traders who sold gold, cotton clothes, plowshare, salt, sugar, and liquor. There is a solitary reference to a goldsmith. One of the records refers to the men of the Nigama. The reference to Nigama and the fact that most of these labels are associated with Jain and Buddhist monks may indicate a northern origin for at least a section of the traders. It is not without significance that the term used for trader in these documents is Vanigan, derived from Sanskrit Vanik. The location of the fine spots of these inscriptions is itself revealing. They lie on major routes within the Tamil country. In the anthologies too, we have references to exchanges of the products of different dynasties. That literature also makes occasional references to Chat from Sanskrit Sartha, translated as caravan. Urayur Ilamban Vaniganar and Madurai Arivai Vanigan Ilavetanar are described by historians as specialized traders in gold and textiles, respectively, although they figure in the literature as poets who composed songs. In any case, trade oriented towards profit is hard to come by. What can at best be seen is exchanged based on need and reciprocity. Gift and redistribution were the other forms of exchange, but even there, the basis was either reciprocity or patronage, not value or profit. The Roman presence, attested by Tamil songs, Greco-Roman accounts, archaeology of Roman settlements themselves, and innumerable hoards of Roman coins, tells a similar story. This was taken in the past to show that South India had reached a high degree of civilization to have had trade with the Roman world on equal terms. That historiography waxed eloquent about the numerous ports, marts, and emporia on the South Indian coast. Hadn't the draining away of all the gold from Roman treasury sent a chill of consternation down the spine of every responsible Roman citizen? Wasn't it on account of this trade in Oriental luxuries whose balance was heavily in favor of South India? In discussing evidence of the Roman Empire, however, it is important to bear in mind the fact that in the items exported, there is a conspicuous absence of the only possible surplus product of the most productive regions of South India, that is, rice. So also, there is no indication that items imported were fit for consumption. For what was exported included pepper, ginger, cardamom, cloves, and similar spices, faunal articles such as animal hides, ivory, apes, and peacocks, wild wood articles such as aloe, sandal, and teak, precious stones like beryl and pearl, and some cotton fabrics. Gold and silver coins constituted the chief items of import, besides some copper, tin, and arsenic. Significantly, a major share of the Roman coins discovered from South India come from hoards and are very few from occupational levels. Most of these are yet fresh from the mints, showing no wear and tear. Some of them have a hole at the edge, indicating their having been used as ornaments, such as in necklaces or as pendants. This shows clearly that the Roman coins were not used as media of exchange, but as primitive valuables used for their socio-technique or idiotechnique value. This points once again to a situation where ideas of price and profit do not make much sense from the Indian point of view. Although what the Roman traders were paying was the price of the commodities they bought, as it was a veritable spice trade for them. So also, the ports and centers of exchanges in the interior could be shown as urban centers, but they were rather enclaves brought into existence by what has been described as stimulus from outside and not any organic development from within. Thus, the economy and society are shown as being characterized by subsistence production, redistribution, reciprocity, and patronage. The literature of the period elaborates this further. The copious accounts of war, where the concern was plunder and cattle lifting, illustrate the general ethos of society. The hero par excellence was the warrior hero, and the poets are never tired of extolling his heroism in different ways. The innumerable hero stones, as well as references to the elaborate procedure of raising and worshipping them in the literature, as are further evidence of the general ethos of war and the cult of the warrior hero. Redistribution of the booty captured in war and the communal feasts following the plundering raids are brought out vividly in the songs, the latter often approximating to potlatch-like destruction. This went a long way in claiming prestige and status to the hero who went to war, and his kinsman basked in the reflected glory. Side by side, we also see a number of bards and minstrels known as panas, sometimes with members of their families, singing the praise of a hero in the numerous poems of love in the anthologies. These bards and minstrels moved from one center to another and were rewarded amply by the heroes with gifts. The munificence of the hero was often the subject matter of the song, and they earned their composers further gifts from the patrons. This cycle too formed part of the process of legitimation, apart from the redistributive potlatch-like exercises mentioned above. What emerged was a somewhat contradictory notion chief in an acephalic society. Apart from the heads of the households or the elders of clan settlements, we come across a number of such chiefs in the literature. Where it was possible, the chief led plundering raids into the rich rice-producing Marudam plains and sought to control them. These raids and the booty which they brought enhanced the resources of those chiefs. They could now give more gifts, organize more potlatch-like ceremonies. This was a definite advantage which those chiefs who lived in the proximity of riparian plains had over the others farther afield. Such chiefs naturally got greater legitimacy commensurate to the more generous gifts they were able to give and the more elaborate feasts and other communal gatherings they were able to organize. Claims staked on the rice-producing plains in the form of occasional rides got graduated as regular control once this potential was realized. Control of the riparian plains also meant control of the rivers. These were arteries, as it were, which connected the hills and forests to the sea. It was largely at the mouths of these rivers that the ports frequented by the Roman raiders say. It was possibly through these rivers that the hill products, which formed the bulk of the merchandise, flowed the ports. Thus, those chiefs who were privileged enough to have control over the Marutham plains and their produce also had control over the precious items brought in by the Roman traders. The primitive valuables of idiotechnic value, which they were now able to flaunt and occasionally give away as gifts, enhanced their prestige further. So also their legitimacy. This relative superiority gained by the twin advantage of controlling the rice-producing plains and the transmarine trade set them apart from the less fortunate chiefs. Thus, we see the distinction made in the literature between two kinds of chiefs as Vayanthar and Velir. These were the Chera, Chola, and Pandya, constituting the Vayanthar, often translated as the three crowned kings, and several of the worlds known as Kurudila Mannar or the lesser kings. The relatively insignificant distinctions of detail apart, the organization and functioning of these chiefs were similar. Kinship, agnatic and affinal, formed the major principle of organization, while reciprocity and patronage formed the basis of redistribution. Mobilization of resources was largely through plundering raids. No regular mechanism of appropriating surplus as tax can be identified there, nor does one come across any agency that can be considered even remotely as carrying out functions associated normally with the state, not to speak of a bureaucracy. Such urban centers as we come across are presented as resulting from external stimuli and not as products of an organic development from within. No trace of what could be described as monumental architecture has come down to us. There certainly is evidence of literacy, but how far it was used for purposes of communication is very questionable. Its exotic character in the context of South India is hard to miss. In any case, there is nothing which presents itself as an administrative document showing the presence of the state through these records. Again, even though the general ethos of society was centered on war and the cult of warrior hero, nothing which can approximate to an organized military arm of the state is visible in the songs. Nobody had any monopoly over violence. Ferocious fighters do figure as individuals, and they attach themselves occasionally to this chief or that, or a caravan which needed defense from a plundering raid. In short, there is nothing, whether in literature, epigraphy, or archaeology, which points to the institution of state in that society. However, it was not a seamless world sealed off from any influence from outside. Right from the days of the Mauryan Empire, there is evidence of its contact with the Ganga Valley. South India was getting exposed to ideas and institutions which had their origins in North Indian plains. Evidence of this can be seen in the artifacts brought in by the traders from the north. These included, apart from the punch-marked coins and other material objects, faiths such as Jainism and Buddhism. Their prevalence is attested by the cave label inscriptions and the poems of a later date, that is the Padananki. Another element from the north, though not introduced through the agents of trade in any direct manner, was the Brahmanical one. A number of poets who composed songs were themselves Brahmanas. At least in one case, a Brahmana poet says that he had stepped into the shoes of the Pana bard. And the Brahmana poets could be more effective in their new role as they were veterans equipped with the panegyric genre such as Gatha, Narasamsi, Akhyana, etc. of the Vedic type and the Itihasa Purana tradition which developed later. There are also cases where the Brahmanas cajoled the chiefs into performing Vedic sacrifices. At least the beginning towards accepting the hegemony of Vedic Shastraic Puranic ideology can be seen in this literature and the society which produced it. There is even the claim that the chiefs got the Mahabharata translated into Tamil. There are also attempts in the songs to seek linkages between the chiefs on the one side and the epic heroes on the other, assuming thereby a close familiarity with the heroes and themes. In fact, apart from the bardic songs themselves and the potlatch-like feasts, a new means of legitimacy was now available to the chiefs. The sacrifices and what adumbrated court poetry were available in return for the patronage extended to the Brahmanas. If this is the picture, which I hope I have not caricatured, that we get about the early historical period of South India, the one that we have about the next distinctive phase in the history of South India is almost entirely different. The passage from the one to the other is not as closely illuminated as what are obtaining at either of its ends. Therefore, what the historian can do is to try and extrapolate the information from both sides with a view to constructing a meaningful picture of what lay between them or the passages from the one to the other. By the 7th century, the historical scene becomes brighter once again. Profuse light is shed from various angles. A notable feature, however, is the entirely different nature of the sources in both form and content. Inscriptions in their thousands form the chief category of sources now. Literature too is another important category, but it is not anymore the oral compositions of the wandering minstrels. It is the literature of the court and the temple with all its stereotypical details. There are other expressions of high culture, which include monumental architecture of stupendous proportions. It will be a truism to say that this sudden emergence of newer and richer sources, entirely different in form and content from those of an earlier period, is indicative of a transformation that society had gone through. When one goes deeper into the sources and examines the world represented by them more closely, the transformation will be brought home more clearly. The inscriptions themselves, for instance, demonstrate this in numerous ways. These epigraphs record largely royal charters or proceedings of the local bodies of various descriptions, with the somewhat pompous statement that both the medium and the message were intended to last as long as the moon and the stars endure. Both announce the presence of the state in an unmistakable manner. The royal charters directly and the resolutions of local bodies in an oblique manner. They are concerned with the grant of land or other arrangements related to the utilization of land. Thus, they show the importance that agriculture had come to acquire in the economy. They also tell us how far the distribution of agrarian surplus had led to differentiation, bringing about a division of society into distinct and mutually antagonistic classes. There are also records related to urban centers and trade, artisans and their activities, and so on, all going to show the sea change that had overtaken economy and society by the time these records begin to make their appearance. Of these, the single most striking factor is perhaps the phenomenal expansion that agriculture had registered. One comes across numerous agrarian settlements in the period. In fact, a process which characterizes this period is the steady growth and expansion of such settlements in both number and scope. Although we come across the existence of agrarian settlements in a sporadic way, even in the earlier period, they are too few and far between to have been of any serious consequence to economy and society as a whole. On the contrary, the ones which came up in the period after the 7th century proved to be central. However, there is one problem in studying these settlements, a problem caused by the nature of inscriptions themselves. These records are mainly from or related to temples, and the information we have is largely one-sided and biased heavily in favor of Brahmanical institutions. This picture need not be taken to represent the reality. Groups invisible in historical records cannot be taken as non-existent. Their partial visibility is a function of the nature and interest of the records themselves, or rather than a commentary on their importance. Even in the heavily one-sided documents, we do get information regarding the numerous non-Brahmana peasants known as Velanvahai villages. Thus, an examination of a couple of records from the big temple at Tanjavur and another from Gopuram has helped in demonstrating the character of such settlements. The Velanvahai villages, it has been shown, contained in them habitation sites, cremation grounds, sources of drinking water, irrigation channels, cultivated fields, pastures, etc. The residential areas on closer look present the following. The quarters of the landholders, known as Urdatham or Ur Irikkai, that of the cultivators, Kudi Irikkai, that of the artisans, Kamanasheri, that of the Ilavas, Toddy tappers, known as Ilacheri, and that of the agricultural laborers, Paraicheri. This demonstrates the existence of at least 5 strata in society, distinguishable even at a physical plane. Of these, those who owned land are referred to as Kani Udayar show themselves up in such records as are available for the non-Brahmadeya Velanvahai villages. Since they are mentioned as residing in the quarters known as Ur Irikkai or Urdatham, it follows that they were largely identified within the Ur. This helps in the identification of a composition of the corporate body of Velanvahai villages known as the Ur, Urar, or Urom. It has been shown that membership of this body varied from 1 to 29. A large majority of them had about 10 members on an average. It has been calculated that individual members held land in extent ranging from 2 to 10 velis. The process of individual landowners acquiring more and more land, and larger number of private landholders coming into existence is registered by documents showing the steady expansion of agriculture. This led naturally to an increased importance of these peasant proprietors and their corporate bodies. As I stated earlier, the information regarding the organization and functioning of the corporate bodies of the Vallanvahai villages is far less copious than we get about the Brahmana villages, in spite of the former being probably more numerous. This is quite natural on account of the character of our records. However, it is clear that such bodies of the Vallanvahai villages were constituted by the landholders in the villages. There were not too many other restrictive qualifications, such as the ones which obtained in the Brahmana villages. This body, known as the Ur, the Urar, or the Urom, acted as a corporate entity and concerned itself with the management of landed property in various ways, namely sale and purchase of land, gift of land, assessment and collection of land tax, exemption of dues, etc. It is the landowners who had any business in such bodies, and there are even explicit statements to the effect that only members of the Ur paid tax, and also conversely that only those who paid tax were members of the Ur. However, a body which is seen more prominently in records is that of the Nadu. This expression was used to indicate both a grouping of several villages and the assembly of its spokesmen. The Nadu is shown as a spontaneous grouping of several Ur villages. All the constituent villages were homogeneous, none having had any special privileges. The assembly of the Nadu, also known as Natar, was likewise constituted by members of the Ur assembly. There is no indication in the records that any one member had any special privilege in the assembly. There was no chief or president. Historians in the past had taken these administrative divisions, as administrative divisions of the Pandya or the Pallava or the Chola government. On the other hand, scholars like Bernstein take these units as the foci of power in the medieval South Indian social and political organization. An examination of the evidence inspires confidence in neither. They appear to have been spontaneously evolved groupings of the peasant proprietors looking after problems of agriculture such as irrigation or donation of land when the state recognized and incorporated them. They were identified as so many agents to carry out the function of the state, such as the assessment and collection of revenue. The penetrating analysis of James Heitzman has brought out this effectively and shown that the pattern seen in the process of this incorporation is exactly in conformity with the pattern in the fortunes of the Chola state. The more successful the attempts at centralization, the more subdued these local units, and versa. If the historian is handicapped by a paucity of sources in relation to the Vallanvahai villages, that is a profusion of information regarding the Brahmadeya villages that confronts him. This is not, as I said earlier, to be taken to mean that the latter had any priority in terms of number. But priority they did enjoy as they represented what could be described as a more progressive force in society. The fact that it is from the Brahmanical villages that we have the largest number of inscriptions, including Those which throw light on the non-Brahmana villages shows not only a higher level of literacy for those groups, but also a concern they had to record their decisions for future reference and in a more or less permanent form. I quote from Nilagada Shastri, the inscriptions on temple walls served the purpose of a public registration office by conserving a trustworthy record of sales, mortgages, and other forms of transfers of property rights in village lands, unquote. This concern itself is significant. Besides, the records show a more evolved nature of the relations of production in those villages and consequently a more stratified society with both divisions and antagonism among the sections articulated in a clearer manner. Brahmana villages functioned as corporations of landowners who were not only Brahmanas by birth, but also required to be accomplished in their educational qualifications with the knowledge of Vedas, Shastras, etc. The organization of the corporate bodies such as Sabha and Mahasabha, or there are some committees such as the Parishad, the Varyam, etc., followed the prescriptions of the Dharmasastras. So did their proceedings and the actions taken to follow the decisions. The solidarity of the group is brought out by the ruthless discipline bordering on the masochistic with which decisions were enforced on individual members. More than a concern with justice, it is the instinct of self-preservation that is seen most strikingly in these exercises. The importance of such discipline is appreciated best when it is borne in mind that these bodies were enclaves of an exotic minority surrounded by a majority with local roots and moorings. They acquired control over vast tracts of land and with them the minds of people and standardized the pattern of social differentiation. The grants they received, of which there is increasing evidence from the 8th century onwards, created superior rights over land and its earlier occupants. Or else, the grantees were allowed to evict them or extinguish the existing rights of the earlier occupants and assign them fresh rights. This section does not show itself up in the vast majority of grants of the Pallavas, which may suggest that the land that was granted in most cases was relatively unsettled. These early charters from the 7th century present the beginnings of a structured relationship in the matter of land rights. We have at least 3 tiers indicated by the records. The state at the top with its right to collect surplus as tax and enjoying at least a theoretical final right over land. The intermediary Brahmanical groups with the newly created superior rights over land and the tenant cultivators at the bottom. The groups at the bottom were not themselves differentiated. In the Pandyan territory, in a slightly period, the picture is clearer. The grants of land, mostly to Brahmanas and their temples, but occasionally to a Jain center also, confer 2 kinds of rights, the Karanmai and the Miyarchi, which were the right to cultivate and the supervisory right, respectively, echoing the expression Karshayata, Karshapayatascha, cultivate or get it cultivated. In similar contexts in the records from North India in the post-Gupta period, below these 2 shades, there appears to have been Kudimai or occupancy right At the bottom were laborers who were attached to soil and transferred along with the superior rights to it. In the Chera kingdom on the west coast too, we have a comparable situation. Land was owned variously by the ruler as part of his private estate and by the local chiefs. But what is most visible in the records is that held by the Brahmanical groups as their own property and as the corporate property of the temple. Below these owning groups were the tenants, Karalar, the occupants, Udiyalar at the bottoms, the laborers at the rock bottom. In some cases, where land is mentioned explicitly as granted on service tenure, there were those groups too, enjoying a superior rights over the laborers. This pattern repeats itself even in the case of a trading organization which possessed the land. It is in the case of the Chola country that the picture is clearest, both on account of the fabulously rich data we have from the country and the systematic analysis which they are subjected to. The complex structure of agrarian relations is brought out by these, the king at the top and the different kinds of hierarchies below them. Now I have given the details, but I'll skip them. The world of primary economic activity, namely agriculture, is shown to have undergone such a phenomenal change. The case of trade was not any different either. It has been shown that in the wake of the agrarian developments that were taking place under the Pallavas and Pandyas, and which continued under the Cholas, trade and urbanization became more elaborate and complex and showed signs of being structurally different. It's not anymore the exchange based on need and reciprocity of natural products for primitive valuables. It was trade in finished goods as an instituted process with clear notions of pricing and profit and other forces of market operating. Well-organized groups of merchants of both native and foreign origin are met with in the records together with elaborate details of their activities and organization. Trading centers acquire a certain degree of autonomy and are controlled by corporations of traders. The role of state and its symbiotic relation with the trading relations as brought out by the records and the recent analysis of these records. An interesting case is recorded in the Syrian Christian copperplates of AD 849, which were granted by the chief of Vayanad, a chief who acknowledged the overlordship of the Chera ruler. Now, I have given the details of this grant, which shows the very elaborate, rigorous arrangements for the administration of trade, which shows that trade was not anymore the old exchange for purposes of reciprocity and patronage. The statements in this record are enough to drive home how elaborate and streamlined the process was when compared to the earlier period. Such records are not isolated. A number of such corporations flourish, such as Anjuvanam, Manigramam, Mayavole, and so on. Their activities go a long way in the process of urbanization, Nagaram being the word used to indicate both a trading corporation and a town. Equally significant is the fact that separate caste groups emerge with trade and artisanal activities as their profession. That the Vaishya category was absent in this part of the country has been pointed out as an aberration and sought to be explained away in various ways by historians in the past. What is more important than the Vaishya label are the putative functions of these groups, with agriculture, pastoral activities, and trade being taken up by distinct caste groups in society. In fact, the institution of caste itself was a characteristic feature of the changed scenario. Doubts about the very existence of caste in South India in the period of the Cholas have been expressed by scholars. This conclusion is unwarranted. One sees not only Brahmanas, Vallalas, and Jettis who accounted for the prominent groups, but also a number of others that included major sections of the semi-tribal groups getting transformed into peasants and other occupational groups. Interestingly, even the legal myth of Sankirna Jati is invoked in several cases to define the caste status of newly consolidating occupational groups such as masons, weavers, etc. Again, at least from the time of the Cholas, there are references to the existence of well-known vertical division of castes into right hand and left hand, Valangai and Idangai respectively. Whatever the origin of caste system, the way in which it functioned in South India followed the Brahmanical norms, and with the principle of Varnashrama Dharma as the rationalization, the institution gave the stratified society a standard appearance. In any case, the fact that society was divided into distinct sections with a clearly defined hierarchy is unmistakable in the records. This is a marked deviation from the picture represented by the Tamil anthologies, where social differentiation, if not altogether unknown, had not got entrenched, and Jati had not congealed itself as an institution. A closely related aspect is religion and its expression. If the cult of the hero and of the deities of the respective landscapes formed what could be described as religion in the earlier period, both were relegated to the background in the period that followed. Its place was taken increasingly by the worship of the Agamaic deities such as Shiva, Vishnu, and those who are identified as their kith and kin. This subsumed the old folk deities, with Mayon being identified as Krishna, one of the avatars of Vishnu, Chayon as Skanda Kartikeya, a son of Shiva, and Quatravai variously as one of the female gods of the Agamaic pantheon. Another feature which was strikingly absent in the earlier period and which came into existence in this period, dominating the new landscape in every possible way, was the temple, the concern of this festival. The importance of this institution, not only in the religious history, but also in the economy, society, politics, culture, and other aspects of human life, can hardly be exaggerated. Such a formation, with a relatively advanced means of production, considerable agrarian surplus and its differential distribution, leading to relations of production going well beyond kinship ties and bringing about distinct and mutually antagonistic classes, the instituted processes of trade and urban networks, replacing the exchange of natural products for primitive valuables, and the isolated urban enclaves, a hierarchically oriented society where clannish loyalties had broken down and caste identities had solidified, and an overarching ideology which subsumed and legitimized all these was ready to receive the state, as it were, on its arrival, with all the details that scholars attribute to the institution of state. It was in every way the expression of the new social formation, which had come up on the ruins of the old. Its ideological apparatus of legitimation too conformed to the new situation. Speaking about the self-image of royalty, we have seen the sources of this validation. Further statements of the power of the ruler can be seen by the elaborate claims about military expeditions and, of course, success, which the rulers are always credited with. The way in which even iconography and architecture, apart from whole genre of court poetry, were used for this purpose is phenomenal. How the concept of sovereignty is elaborated in the different sculptures and how the sovereignty of the divine is transported into the temporal plane is an interesting study. So also how monumental architecture, starting from its very size, proclaimed the greatness of the builders, is very significant, as witness the example of the Birhadishwara temple of Tanjavur. In one of the inscriptions there, it states very clearly that it was the house of Rajarajeshwaram Udayar, built by Udayar Rajarajadevan. A mere transposition of the substantive as the adjective covers the entire distance from the sacred to the profane. Such monuments are unequivocal statements of the power and resources of the builder. They have to be understood as more than a mere system maintaining mechanism of a weakly organized polity, or as one of the means of extending a ritual hegemony. Munificent endowments formed another aspect of this attempt at validation. Rajendra Chola's Karandai plates record the creation of a new settlement of as many as 1,080 Brahmanas. The way in which a certain ideology was pressed into service for the legitimation of a hegemony is crucial here. It is important to realize that this hegemony was far from ritual. It was real political hegemony. Thus, we have two formations entirely different from one another on either end of what has been conventionally described as the ancient period of South Indian history. It goes without saying that no meaningful scheme of periodization can treat these as two parts of the same period. We believe that there is a definite case for identifying two distinct periods there, the one coming to a close by the 3rd or 4th century and the other emerging by the 7th or 8th century of the Common Era. The 3 or 4 centuries that lay between the two may be considered as the passage representing the transition from the one to the other. This process of transition and the factors responsible for it can be understood with clarity if the passage itself is examined closely. What obtains there would explain its causality and its effects. There are mainly two ways in which the centuries following the age of the Sangam have been looked at by the historians. One of them regards it as a long historical night. I am using the expression of the Nilakanta Shastri. We know little of the period of more than 3 centuries that followed, says Nilakanta Shastri. Using the peepholes provided by epigraphy and literature, he sees that a mysterious and ubiquitous enemy of civilization the evil rulers called Kalabhras had come and upset the established political order, which had restored not only their defeat at the hands of the Pandyas and Pallavas, as well as the Chalukyas of Badami. He admits that, I quote, of the Kalabhras, we have as yet no definite knowledge, unquote. But from such information as could be placed together from a Buddhist text, a Tamil grammatical text, and the Velvikudi plates, he regards the Kalabhras to have uprooted and kept in confinement the rulers of Tamilagam, such as the Chera, Chola, and Pandya, and abrogated Brahmadeya rights. There was no love lost between these interlopers and the people of the lands they overran, he writes. Elsewhere, he writes that the Kalabhras were a widespread tribe whose large-scale defection to the heretical faiths resulted in political and social upset lasting over the generations. But the Kalabhra interregnum was not entirely unproductive. He says that it was during this period that the 18 minor works, the twin epics of Sharapadigaram and Manimekkadai, etc. were composed. Many of their authors were votaries of the heretical sects. There is another way in which these centuries are looked at. There was no distinction at all, and there was a slow, gradual development of society and culture during this period. Interestingly, even this line cannot do without the Kalabhras or the notion that what went before the 7th century was still a mysterious period. Nearly every detail of the other fashion, that is the Nilagada Shastri fashion, regarding the Kalabhra interregnum is accepted here, but it is seen as marking, I quote from Bertenstein, a point where non-peasant people made their strongest bid to control some at least of the lowland peasant population. This onslaught appears to have been the culmination of a long period of non-peasant armed resistance to the expansion of peasant society, unquote. Nothing, however, in the scanty evidence of Kalabhra presence in the sources of doubtful authenticity supports this picture of a long period of armed struggle between the peasants and non-peasants in which the latter, represented by the Kalabhras, ultimately emerged successful. After Nilagada Shastri and Bertenstein, historians have not quite given up chasing the Loch Ness monster. In an attempt to look for evidence of a crisis which might have led to the dissolution of the earlier mode of production brought about by the mysterious contradictions to a point where the economy could not function in its fundamental form. Rajan Gurukul has turned to the Kalabhras in reference to them. In the epigraph, the later periods are seen as pointers to a kind of total crisis. I quote, "It seems that the Kalabhras held probably a sort of predatory control over Tamilagam for some time after suspending its ruling lineages. The period also witnessed the inflow of numerous groups of Buddhists and Jains to the land. We are taken to the following certainty from these possibilities." When a large number of possibilities are there, it takes you to a certainty. That is the kind of arithmetic that works here. It is significant that the main targets of the Kalabhras were the landed households of the Brahmanas. the early copperplates of the Pallavas and Pandyas allude to a dislocation of Brahmana households and their gifts of land. Many of the Ekabhoga Brahmadeyas lost their privileges, and the Brahmanas had to flee in the wake of aggression. The general chaos reminded the landed Brahmanas of the evils of the Kali age. Gurukul refers to the influential papers of R.S. Sharma and B.N.S. Yadava on Kali age as social crisis and argues that, I quote, the thoughts are quite relevant to the questions of transition from ancient to medieval in South Indian history also. This adds one more dimension to the problem of Kalabras by equating it with the tension associated with Kali age and looking at it as basic to a transitional process in Tamil history. This calls for looking at the evidence once again. As I suggested earlier, the picture of a Kalabra presence in Tamil country rests on evidence of doubtful validity. A Buddhist work speaks of the patronage its author had from a Kalabra ruler, Achyuta Vikanta. A much later Jain writer on Tamil grammar speaks of the patronage he had from the Kalabra, who had imprisoned the Chera, Chola, and Pandya. As for evidence from epigraphy, it is even more dubious. In the formulaic descriptions of universal conquests, different Pallava rulers are credited with subjugating the Cholas, Keralas, Pandyas, Maravas, Simhalas, Banas, Andhras, Saindhavas, Kadambas, Tulus, Konkanas. The solitary reference in a Pandyan inscription is to the claim of a Brahmana seeking the grant of a village to him, that the village belonged formerly to his ancestors as granted by Paliyaga Mudugudumi Peruvaludi. The Pandyan king and the Kalabras had abrogated the grant. The evidence of the general chaos reminding us of the evils of the Kali age is limited to the formulae by which individual rulers are described to have put an end to the evils of Kali and established Dharma. These statements are a far cry from the pathological fear of the Kali age in the Puranic literature. It is clear, therefore, that the evidence of the presence of the Kalabras and the ground to equate the period of their dominance to indicating a general crisis do not support the overdrawn pictures we have in the writings of historians, starting from P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar to Rajan Gurukul. When evidence is not at peace with theory, it is the former, that is the evidence, that the historian should go to. However, alluring the latter, that is theory, maybe. How then can one characterize the passage? Extrapolating from what is known on either side and using such evidence as are available, one can still seek to fill the gap, however tentatively. We have seen that forces capable of dissolving the formation and bringing about a new one were present even towards the close of the early historical period. These included the importance that plough agriculture was gaining in the riparian plains and the Brahmanical element that was introduced into society and culture. The warriors who took part in the plundering raids for the chiefs start insisting that they would settle for nothing less than fertile paddy fields in return for their services. Brahmanas who work as priests and officials in sacrifices are granted land on a large scale. The didactic texts attributed to the last phase of what is called the Sangam Age extol the virtues of agriculture as opposed to plunder, and almost simultaneously underline the superiority of the ethic of the Brahmanical Shastra texts. It is in this context that the significance of the outstanding epigraphical discovery of the Pulanguruchi inscriptions is brought home. They record the creation of Brahmadeyas with superior rights over the cultivating tenants. A greater hierarchy is very, very clearly visible. The old form of labor, namely family labor, was not sufficient to manage the expansive farms. As all of us know, agriculture is a very, very labor-intensive activity. So the old form of labor, that is family labor, was not sufficient to manage. Yes? Do you say anything?
Time availability.
I may take another 5 minutes.
Could you please? Yeah. Thank you.
And I may take another 5 minutes.
Please. Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
The extra kin labor and all that it entailed, such as compensation, extraction of surplus, differential distribution, and division of society into classes. Thus, we have on the one side the picture of an agrarian expansion, and on the other, that of the creation of a class of non-cultivating Brahmana landholders placed above the peasantry. The latter, in all probability, worked as a major catalyst for the grants of cultivable land to them, assumed a labor force outside kinship. This proved to be the thin end of a wedge, which brought about the eventual erosion of the earlier system of production and distribution based on kinship, reciprocity, and patronage, and the evolution of a new system based on differential distribution of surplus. Needless to say, the process was slow, uneven, and extremely complex. The new elements in society and culture that show themselves up in this period reflect and legitimize the new system. We have the emergence and solidification of the institution of Jati, change in religion represented by the worship of Agamic deities. But more important than any of these is the emergence of what has been described as the Bhakti movement in South India, represented by the movement of the Nayanars and Dalwars, centered on temples. The trajectory of the development of the movement from Venkatam to Kanchi through the Chola and Pandya countries to the west coast also charts the trajectory of the growth of temples and the agrarian expansion. As this expansion was at the root of a series of developments in economy, society, and polity, the Bhakti movement is to be taken as organically related to them. The acrimony involved in the disputations between Jainism and Shaivism, evidence of which is available in literature and epigraphy, and the success of the latter can be shown as indicating the triumph of the agrarian order is the latter represented. So also, patronage that the moment got from rulers such as Mahendravarman, Nadumaran, Kochanganan, Chairaman Perumal, and Kulashekara Alvar was made use of by them in consolidating their position and gaining legitimacy for the new formation, presided over by the monarchies which they represented. Even in the later period, when the Chola state was established in a most authoritative manner, it used in a big way the literature and institutions associated with temples as props. In short, the Bhakti movement can be seen as representing the transition at an ideological plane from one formation to another in this part of the country. What is interesting about the Tamil Bhakti movement is the fact that it is centered on temples. This had far-reaching implications. What is most relevant to the theme of this colloquium, however, is that the institution of the temple, with all that it stood for, got a boost on account of this movement. It's a moot point whether the temple came first or Bhakti came first, but it is a fact that both supported and drew nourishment from one another. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Veerathat. That was an excellent and enlightening lecture to kick off our day one of this Indology festival. Thank you very much. We will go on to the second lecture for the day, and the topic is about perhaps one of the most well-known dynasties, the Imperial Cholas, the artistic engineers of the South. That's the topic, and we have with us Dr. Chitra Madhavan, who will be delivering this lecture. Dr. Chitra Madhavan completed her MA and MPhil from the Department of Indian History, University of Madras, and her PhD from the Department of Ancient History and Archaeology, University of Mysore. She is the recipient of 2 postdoctoral fellowships from the Department of Culture, Government of India, and from the Indian Council of Historical Research, New Delhi. She is the author of 9 books, which includes 2 volumes on the history and culture of Tamil Nadu, 5 volumes on the Vishnu temples of South India, a book on the temples of Kanchipuram, and a book on the Sanskrit education and literature in ancient and medieval Tamil Nadu and epigraphical study. She has written a text for the coffee table book, Snapshots of a Bygone Era, that contains about 100 photographs on the monuments of India. Dr. Chitra has co-edited a book, South India Heritage, an Introduction, containing 500 articles on various aspects of the heritage and culture of South India. She has compiled 3 books on the sculptures on various aspects of the heritage and culture of South India. She has compiled 3 books, one on the sculptures for Kalakshetra Foundation, one on the Srirangam temple, and the third on the Varadaraja Perumal temple, Kanchipuram. Dr. Chitra has contributed over 100 articles on temple architecture and allied subjects to the multi-volume encyclopedia on Hinduism. She is a guest lecturer at various institutions in Chennai, such as Kalakshetra Foundation, Asian College of Journalism, and Dakshin Chitra. Dr. Chitra's popular walks and her talks, especially on temple architecture, are well renowned. For over a decade, she has inspired hundreds, if not thousands of people, including many of us at Tamil Heritage Trust, to take up Indian heritage as an area of interest. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Chitra Madhavan to deliver her lecture.
Can I?
Yeah.
A very good evening to all of you. Namaskaram. At the outset, my heartfelt thanks to the organizers of Tamil Heritage Trust for including me in the list of speakers of this wonderful series of lectures. Each dynasty in India is being showcased, and I think this is a need of the day to take our history and culture to faraway shores and to the people of India as well, because we understand that history is a subject that's been very badly treated in this country. So I will just give me a second before I screen share. Right. The topic given to me is the Imperial Cholas, and I dedicate this lecture to the one and only Professor K.A. Neelakanta Shastri, Professor of History, University of Madras, whose great service in reading thousands of inscriptions and visiting temples, going through numerous texts, manuscripts, etc., has given us this wonderful book called the Cholas, which is the Veda for us students of history. I would also like to, in this context, remember Sri Kalki Krishnamurti, who may not be very well known to those who do not read Tamil, though translations of his literary novels are available. Historical fiction is what he wrote. And among his best known works is one called Ponniyin Selvan, which is about Chola history. If the common man in Tamil Nadu knows about the Cholas, it's because of this great writer of historical fiction. So now we go to the lecture proper, and I would like to, at the start, acknowledge the various sources we have to understand Chola history. There are very many, plenty in fact, and the historian, the archaeologist, the scholar is thankful to what the Cholas have left behind for us, because we get to know so much about them. The first source, in my opinion, are the Copperplate inscriptions. I'm showing you here on the screen one of the most important Copperplate inscriptions of the Cholas. This is the Thiruvalangada Cheppedu, the Thiruvalangada Copperplate inscription, which is in the Government Museum, Chennai today. This Copperplate inscription, like many of those of the Cholas and their predecessors, the Pallavas and the Pandyas, is bilingual, meaning that the first part is in Sanskrit, which is written in the Grantha script. The Cholas, like the Pallavas and the Pandyas, chose to write this language, Sanskritam, in a script called Grantha. So the first part, which is called the Prashasti, which is something like an introduction, which also gives the lineage of the Cholas, is in Sanskritam. And the second part, which is the operative part, is in Tamil and in the Tamil script. Now, each of these copperplate inscriptions, like those in other parts of India as well, is tied together with a copper ring on which there is a seal, and this is the Chola seal. This is the Chola emblem, the tiger, and you see the two fish because the tiger has literally swallowed the two fish, meaning that the two fish are is the emblem of the Pandyas, and the tiger, the Cholas had conquered the Pandyas. But there's so much more to that. Now, the Thiruvalangada copperplate inscription, this one is of the period of Rajendra Chola, 11th century. It has 31 copper sheets and weighs 92 kg, quite big. But then we come to another one, the Karanda Tamil Sangam copperplate inscription, again of the reign of Rajendra, 11th century, consists of 57 copper plates weighing approximately 111 kg, and here it is. Unfortunately, the ring is broken, but the seal is intact and is the rest of the inscription. This too is bilingual, with a Prashasti portion offering us so much of information about the lineage, the genealogy of the Cholas. Now, the Indology copperplate inscription, which was found near Mayavaram, Mayiladurai, belongs to the reign of Rajendra's second son, Rajendra Chola II, consists of 85 copper sheets and weighs 150 kg. Here it is. All these three inscriptions, all these three copper plates are in the Government Museum, Madras today for all of us to see. The other very important source, far more in number than the copperplate inscriptions, are the lithic records. That is the stone inscriptions which we find etched on the walls, the pillars, sometimes ceiling, sometimes floor of the temples. And this is how the epigraphists, people who study inscriptions, actually copy them from the stone wall. It's laborious, it's a back-breaking effort, but they do it so systematically, so thoroughly, and with such passion. Now, can you see this person, just to get this little inscription, he's literally risking life and limb. Coins are another very important source of the Cholas. We have gold coins. These are gold coins of Rajaraja Chola. And we have a whole lot of copper coins as well, like this. Again, for numismatists, those who study coins, these are very important and they give us a lot of information. We have archaeological excavations. For example, right now there are excavations going on at a place called Maligai Medu, which was once where the palace of Rajendra Chola and his successors stood in the village of Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Many other excavations have yielded a lot of information about the Chola dynasty as well. We have literature, especially Tamil literature, again giving us a lot of data about this dynasty. There are various other sources, foreign sources, a few as well. from foreign writers, but we will go on to the next topic. When we think of the Cholas, and my topic is the Imperial Cholas this evening, we think Tanjavur. But we must do a little bit of rethink, and we must go to the original capital of the Cholas first before we go to Tanjavur. We will eventually land up in Tanjavur. So this, what I'm showing you in this picture is a sculpture from a temple in Trichy, Tiruchirappalli, near which place is Urayur. Urayur has now become part of Trichy itself. And the other ancient name for Urayur was Kori, because you see a rooster in this picture, a Kori. And it is said that at this place, a Kori pecked at an elephant and made him flee. And therefore the Cholas, excuse me, chose this place as their capital. And Kori or Urayur was the Chola capital for a very, very long time. Now, where we have to begin with the Cholas, we have to begin at the start. From the 2nd century BCE, that is BC, down to approximately, or 3rd century BCE, down to the 3rd century CE, is what is famously, popularly known as the Sangam Age in Tamil Nadu. And this is when 3 major dynasties ruled, the Cheras, the Cholas, and the Pandyas. The Cheras ruled from a place called Karur. The Cholas ruled from Urayur or Kori, and the Pandyas from Madurai. And these 3 places are not too far from each other, which makes it clear that these were not huge imperial powers at that time. They were kings, they were small kings. And the Cholas are very famous from that time, especially because of one particular king called Karikala Chola. We hear a lot about him from Sangam literature. There were many, many kings as well, but for want of time, I'm taking the name only of Karikala Chola here. And his claim to fame, which is also mentioned in many of the copperplate inscriptions of the later Cholas, is that he built a dam across the river Kaveri, famously called Grand Anaikat now. It was called Kal Anai. We still call it Kal Anai. This is the modern dam in the place of the old one that Karikala Chola built approximately in the 2nd century CE. And this was a great effort by this great king, because he harnessed the waters of the river Kaveri, and by means of taking the water through canals, etc., he irrigated the already fertile area of the Cholas and making it into one of the most fertile places in all of India. And the granaries were full, and it contributed a lot to the prosperity of this dynasty. So Karikala Chola it is that we remember with a lot of gratitude from the Sangam age. We are skipping many, many years. After the Sangam period, there was an interregnum called the Kalabra interregnum, when the Cholas and some of the other powers of Tamil Nadu went under. And the Cholas also resurfaced after the Kalabras had withdrawn. Around the 9th century, one of the Chola kings, Vijayalaya by name, see how prophetically his parents had named him, Vijaya Alayam, the abode of victory he was, and he ruled from Urayur. He captured Tanjavur, the Tanjavur that we know today, from chieftains called the Muttarayars. The Cholas was then still a very, very small power. They were wedged in between the great Pallavas. The Pallavas had become a superpower by that time in North Tamil Nadu, and the Pandyas, who had grown from strength to greater strength in South Tamil Nadu. The Cholas were really sandwiched between these two powers. From time to time, they sided with the Pallavas against the Pandyas, and at other times they went with the Pandyas against the Pallavas. But in one particular war, which is called the Battle of Sri Purumbiyam or Thirupurumbiyam, which was fought in a place called Sri Purumbiyam near Kumbakonam, the Cholas sided with the Pallavas, and the Pallavas won. Subsequently, Vijayalaya, sick and tired of being a small power sandwiched between these two great ones, decided, along with his son, to fight against the Pallavas. The last Pallava ruler was Aparajita. Look at that name, one who could not be conquered or won over. Vijayalaya, though a very small chieftain at that time, not like Aparajita, who was a very big king with a lot of resources, army, etc. Somehow managed to topple the Pallavas. Aparajita lost the battle, and almost the entire Tondai Mandalam region, that is the Pallava kingdom, empire perhaps, of northern Tamil Nadu, fell into the hands of the Cholas. So that shifting to Tanjavur, the overthrow of the Pallavas, entire northern Tamil Nadu coming under his control, was one major change that happened in the time of Vijayalaya Chola. So I have got these maps from the net, and I'm just showing it to you very quickly. So this was how the Chola Empire kind of started, very approximate maps, in the time of Rajaraja, in the time of Rajendra, and then slowly what goes up must come down, starts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then we see the end of the Cholas in the last quarter of the 13th century. After 1278, the Cholas are not heard of anymore. So Vijayalaya Chola, this is his date, circa 850 to 871 AD. I've already told you a lot about him. Very bold, very brave, very courageous, very ambitious, and overthrew Aparajita Pallava, came to power. Now, in a place called Nartha Malai, which is in Pudukkottai district, there is a temple here, which is under the care of the Archaeological Survey of India, which is called Vijayalaya Cholishwaram. And automatically people think that it was the construction of Vijayalaya Chola. But scholars who have done in-depth research on the architecture, etc., of this temple will tell you that no, it belongs to the dynasty of the Muttarayars, who held sway in the Tanjavur, etc. Regions, and it was their construction, but it has got the name Vijayalaya Cholishwara, just to put that in the right perspective. Now, Vijayalaya's son was Aditya, and like his name, he did shine like the sun. This is his date, circa 871 to 907 CE. Aditya's claim to fame was to hold on to what his father had done and also to expand his kingdom. It was still a Chola kingdom. Aditya continued to rule from Tanjavur. One of his queens, incidentally, was a lady from the Rashtrakuta dynasty. We'll come to that later. Aditya is also credited in many a Chola inscription with building a whole lot of Shivalayas, Shiva temples of stone. Now, this is very important. Why emphasize of stone? Because many temples were still being built of brick at that point of time. So Aditya Chola is credited with building many temples out of stone along the banks of the river Kaveri, all along the shore. There is something about the Chola dynasty that we should know. We understand that kings like saints are buried, and the place where the Chola kings were buried, some we know, many we don't. But in the case of Aditya Chola, we do know. This is a place called Tondamanadu, which is very close to Sri Kalahasti in Andhra Pradesh. And this is the last resting place of Aditya Chola. It is a Shiva temple. Now, this last resting place is called a Pallipadai, and this name of the temple is Adityeshwaram, named after Aditya Chola. Aditya's son, one of his sons who came to the throne, was Parantaka Chola I, and this is when the Chola Empire really becomes a power to reckon with. 907 to 955 was Parantaka's period. And those of you who can read Tamil will read this. Veeranarayana was one of the titles of Parantaka Chola. Many a temple is called Veeranarayana Perumal temple, especially the one in a place called Katumannar Kovil, not too far from Chidambaram. It bears his name because it was built in his time. It's a Vishnu temple, and it's like this. Now, in this Vishnu temple, there is an image of a great Sri Vaishnava Acharya called Sri Nathamuni. Now, Nathamuni was the first Acharya of the Sri Vaishnava lineage, and it is to his credit that he collected the 4,000 Pashurams, or the Tamil hymns of the Alvars. The Alvars were 12 very great Vaishnava saints who lived far before Nathamuni. And he had heard one or two of these hymns, a couple of hymns of the Alvars, and he was very, very keen on collecting all of them, and they had been lost. And he is said to have meditated on repeatedly chanting the verses of Madhurakavi Alvar, one of the Alvars called Kanninar Shirutambar. And it is said that he was able to get all the 4,000 hymns of the Alvars and he put them together. He set them to music and he set them to dance. He taught them to his two nephews, who then spread this tradition far and wide. And he lived in the reign of Parantaka Chola. This is why I'm emphasizing this, what the great things that happened in the reign of Parantaka Chola. And thereby, from the time of Nathamuni's great effort, started this tradition called the Arayar Seva. The Arayar Seva can still be seen in some Vishnu temples, like in Srirangam, like in Alvar Tirunagari, in Srivilliputtur, and to a certain extent in Melakotta in Karnataka as well. It was there in almost every Vishnu temple in Tamil Nadu, but then the tradition has slowly disappeared. The Arayars are very learned in the 4,000 hymns of the Alvars, and in their commentaries, they can sing and they can dance. It takes very many years of learning, and then they perform only before the god in the temples. In the reign of Parantaka Chola, many a temple came to be built. When we think of Chola temples, we think of Tanjavur. First Tanjavur, and then maybe Gangaikonda Cholapanam, a few others. But you see, before the Tanjavur temple was built, and that's not the only temple the Cholas built, scores of temples were built in Parantaka's time and later, in Aditya's, Parantaka's time and much later also. These temples were not of the grandeur of the later Chola temples, no, but they have a delicate beauty. I'm showing you one of those. It's in a place called Pullamanga, a very small village which is between Kumbakonam and Tanjavur. This is the Brahmapurishwara temple, a Shivalayam, recently taken over for maintenance by the Archaeological Survey of India. And this temple is known for its miniature panels. Now, this miniature panel is the size of my ball pen. And look at the number of figures over here. How many elephants, horses, soldiers, etc. And there are many Ramayana panels. This is a Ramayana panel. It's supposed to be Bharata going to meet Rama and bring him back to Ayodhya. This, as you know, is Rama. So there are very many early Chola temples, many of them of the period of Parantaka Chola, miniature sculptures, beautiful, delicate temples. Let's not forget them in our frenzy of looking at the glorious, gigantic, enormous temples of the middle and later Cholas. Now, why I'm showing you this map of the Rashtrakutas, whose capital was Manyaketa, Malkhed, is because one of the queens of Aditya Chola was a Rashtrakuta princess. And she was the daughter of a very great Rashtrakuta king called Krishna II. And her son was Kannaredeva. But it appears that Aditya Chola chose Parantaka as his successor in favor of Kannaredeva. So Krishna II was very miffed. He was very angry. And in order to teach Parantaka a lesson, he led an attack into the heartland of the Cholas to set that Tanjavur is completely destroyed and then rebuilt. He led his army right up to land's end almost to Rameshwaram, and then the Rashtrakuta army came back. It did not deal a death blow to the Cholas. They continued for eons after, but it was definitely a setback. Now, Parantaka Chola's son, his heir apparent, his Yuvraj, Rajaditya, was killed in the battle against the Rashtrakutas. Now, another great thing that we must know in the reign of Parantaka Chola, and the Cholas are known for this, like their predecessors, the Pallavas and the Pandyas as well, and that is for creating huge artificial lakes. And this artificial lake that like stretches for as far as the eye can see is now called Vimanam Eri. Eri in Tamil means a tank or a lake. Veeranarayana, as I said, was one of the titles of Parantaka Chola, and this was called Veeranarayana Eri, the Veeranam Eri of today that supplies water to the city of Chennai. So something that was done as early as the 10th century is very productive even today. Parantaka is also known for, covering the sanctum of Lord Nataraja of Chidambaram with pure gold. And the Chidambaram temple itself, this god, Nataraja, was the Kuladevam or the family deity of the Cholas. And this temple received a lot of attention from various Chola rulers. Now, Parantaka Chola passed away. His eldest son and heir apparent, Raja Aditya, had already been killed by the Rashtrakutas. So it was his second son, most reluctant to become king because he was a great devotee of Shiva and wanted to spend his life in prayer. Gandaraditya became the king. 949 to 950, approximately, he came to the throne. Till 957, he ruled. Short span. His queen was a wonderful, wonderful lady called Sembi and Madevi, as devoted as her husband to God Shiva. Some of the wonderful bronzes that we see today, the Chola bronzes, were from her. They were gifts from her to many Chola temples. Gandaraditya passes away after 7 years of rule, leaves behind a baby. Very young child was that Uttama Chola when Gandaraditya, his father, died. And therefore, Gandaraditya's younger brother, I don't want this to sound like a history class, but I am going forward very soon because this is a very juicy period in Chola history. Arinjaya, Gandaraditya's younger brother, comes to the throne and lives only for 1 year. Now, I just want you to doesn't matter. If I had been somebody in the Chola time, what I would have done is after Arinjaya, I would have brought this Gandaraditya's toddler onto the throne and made someone a regent. That didn't happen. The kingdom passes out of this Uttama Chola's hands into the hands of Arinjaya's son, Sundara Chola, who happens to be Rajaraja, the great Rajaraja's father. From Sundara Chola, it comes back to Uttama Chola for a short while, and then comes the great Rajaraja Chola to the throne. Why the kingdom did not go to Uttama Chola's son is something we will not know. It's not written in any inscription. Rajaraja came to the throne. 985 to 1014. Fairly long reign. One of the greatest emperors ever, undoubtedly. Think Chola, think Rajaraja. Think Chola, think Tanjavur. If the Cholas are well known today, the reason was Rajaraja. Let's understand, kings are well known because of their invasions. So I'll just briefly give you a whole list of his invasions. His career began with an attack on the Cheras of Kerala. He destroyed the military force of the Cheras at a place called Kandarur Salai, near Thiruvalangada, perhaps. He won wars against the Pandyas as he wanted to destroy the alliance between the Pandyas, the Sinhalese, and the Cheras. Rajaraja captured the northern part of Lanka called Iram and started ruling over it. And the capital was shifted from Anuradhapura to Polonnaruwa. Anuradhapura was totally destroyed. He assumed the title Mummudi Chola. That Mummudi is 3 crowns. After defeating the Pandyas, the Cheras, the Sinhalas, he waged wars against the dynasties of the Gangas and Nolambas in the Mysore area. He fought against the Western Chalukyas. He captured the Maldives. He strengthened the relations with a dynasty called the Eastern Chalukyas by giving his daughter in marriage, etc., etc., etc. We'll come to his temple a little later. That's the last part of this lecture. Now, in a place called Leiden in Holland, in the Netherlands, in the Leiden University Museum, you have the set of copper plates issued by Rajaraja. In fact, not many people know. We think it's Rajaraja's inscription. The first part is one part is Rajaraja's, one part belongs to his son Rajendra. This is the seal. You have the tiger and the 2 fish and all of that. This is a copper plate inscription. And it tells you that the king of Sri Vijaya, that is Indonesia and parts of Malaysia, etc., wanted to build a Buddha Vihara. That is a place of worship and stay for the Buddhists who were sailors and coming from that Sri Vijaya empire to Nagapattinam, which was a famous seaport of the Cholas. He sent ambassadors to the court of Rajaraja seeking his permission. And Rajaraja said, definitely, permission granted. You can build your Buddha Vihara in Nagapattinam. But what I will do is, for the upkeep of your Vihara, I will donate a village, a very fertile village called Anai Mangalam. So this copperplate inscription is called the Anai Mangalam Cheppede, which means the copperplate inscription, giving the donation of the village of Anai Mangalam. But today it's famously called the larger Leiden plates. There is also a smaller Leiden plates. So because it's in the Leiden Museum. Much more about Rajaraja a little later. Rajendra Chola, his son and successor, 1012 to 1044, you may see a discrepancy in the date. 985 to 1014, I said Rajaraja. Now I'm saying 1012 to 1044 Rajendra. 2 years seem to overlap, and indeed they did. That's because Rajaraja, in the closing years of his life, not only had made Rajendra the Yuvraj much earlier, but he made him co-ruler, co-king, co-emperor for 2 years. So from 1012 to 1014, father and son ruled together. Now, how do we know this? We know this because when a Chola prince became a king, he was invested with the title of either Rajakesari or Parakesari. Now, Rajaraja was a Rajakesari and Rajendra was a Parakesari. And both the titles are seen together between the periods 1012 to 1014, which means Rajendra was co-ruler. Incidentally, when Rajendra became ruler in 1012, he ruled with his father till 1014. He ruled independently only for 4 years. In 1018, he made his son Rajadiraja co-ruler. So Rajendra was independent ruler only for 4 years, incidentally. Now we talk about temples. We talk about Chola temples for their architecture and sculpture and inscriptions and all of that. But we must also talk about Chola temples. This is a place called Ennairam in Tamil Nadu. This temple is under the care of the Archaeological Survey of India. It's a Narasimha temple, or rather was a Narasimha temple. There's no worship today. It's only a monument. There it is. And here is an inscription, and that talks about, I'm not going into the details, I don't have time for that, but a very, very great center of Vedic education functioned over here. Now, the inscription in this temple, I'm not showing you the exact inscription, but I'm showing you parts of the temple. The inscription gives you the number of students who studied here, number of teachers who taught here, the salaries given to the teachers, the stipend given to the students, how many teachers for each subject, how many students for each subject, etc., etc., etc. The 4 Vedas, ancillary scriptures, all of that was taught. Just goes to show you that the Cholas made their temples very, very, very great centers of learning, and Ennairam was one of those. And today, all you have to speak of this place as a center of learning is one small government school over there. We go to a place called Thiruvalangada, and there is a Varadaraja Perumal temple. Thiruvalangada is in very, very close to Pondicherry, just on the outskirts of Pondicherry, also under the care of the Archaeological Survey of India. Here is the Varadaraja Perumal temple, and this too was a wonderful, wonderful center of learning from an inscription that is here of the time of Rajendra's son and successor, Rajadiraja. Here too were a whole lot of students and a whole lot of teachers, and the number of subjects that were studied there is also given. The Thiruvalangada temple was much before the period of Rajaraja and Rajendra and Rajadiraja. Their inscriptions are there, but this is a much earlier temple. Chock full of Chola inscriptions is this temple. Must visit for those who love Chola history. Now, where did Rajendra breathe his last? In a place called Brahmadesham, and he died in 1044. In all likelihood, this is the Pallipadai, or last resting place of Rajendra Chola. Sons and successors of Rajendra Chola, this is very, very interesting. I'll just show you this and then we'll proceed very, very fast to the temples. Rajendra Chola, as I told you, was a Parakesari. I'd like you to follow this chart attentively if you're interested in history. Rajaraja had one son only, Rajendra the First. he had one daughter called Kundavai, whom he named after his elder sister, whom he revered. Now, this Kundavai was given in marriage to a prince called Vimaladitya, who belonged to the dynasty of the Eastern Chalukyas. I'm afraid I'm making this sound like a history class, which I didn't set out to do, but this is so important for Chola history, I'd like you to follow it. Okay? So this Kundavai, Chola princess, who marries Vimaladitya, a Chalukya prince, have a son called Rajaraja Narendra. Since this boy, his father was Chalukya, he's a Chalukyan prince. He's ruling somewhere in Andhra. Now, Rajendra has so many children, 3 sons. Then he has a daughter called Amanga Devi, whom he gives in marriage to her own cousin, Rajaraja Narendra. So, one Chola princess marrying a Chalukya prince, another Chola princess marrying a Chalukyan prince, and the Amanga Devi and Rajaraja Narendra have a son. He is also called Rajendra, and he becomes Kulotunga Chola the first. Why this is so important is because, keep that aside, come back here. Rajendra had 3 sons, Rajadiraja, Rajendra II, Veera Rajendra, who died one after the other. After Veera Rajendra, there was one Adi Rajendra who died. He didn't even rule 1 full year. After that, there was nobody. This fellow died as a crown prince. There was nobody from the direct lineage of the Cholas to rule. So they have to call this boy, young man, who was by blood a Charukyan prince. Only the mother was Chola. Grandmother was also Chola. They call him and they make him sit on the throne in Gangaikonda Cholapuram, because there was nobody else. So from this time onwards, 1071 onwards, you do not have the direct lineage of the Cholas. You have to call them the Chalukya Chola. Chalukya comes first because father was Chalukya and then Chola. Oh, this is the point I wanted to make. Anyway, coming back, the first son of Rajendra was Rajadiraja. Second son was Rajendra II. Third son was Veera Rajendra. They ruled one after the other. What happened to their sons, we don't know. Veera Rajendra's reign, though very short, I must mention one thing. There is a place called Tirumukkudal, not too far from Kanchipuram, Chennai to Kanchipuram route only. So if you go through Chengalpet. Now this temple is also under the Archaeological Survey of India. In the reign of Veera Rajendra, one of the longest Tamil inscriptions is here. Again, this was a colossal Vedic institution that functioned out of the premises of this temple. That many teachers, that many students, that many subjects, that many stipends, that many salaries were all paid. Plus, there was a hostel attached to this college. There was a hospital attached. The Cholas did a lot for medicine. They did a whole lot. In that Ayurvedic hospital, the number of medicines that were stored, 30 of them are given, many of them being used even today. There were 2 doctors, one a surgeon, one a physician. There were barbers, there were nurses. All this is given in this very, very detailed inscription. Adi Rajendra ruled only for 1 year. And then, yes, we go to Kulotunga Chola the first, Chalukya Chola, his son Vikrama Chola. Look, very, very long dynasty this is. Kulotunga Chola the second, Rajaraja Chola the second, Rajadiraja Chola the second, Kulotunga Chola the third. I have to pause for a moment and tell you something about this Kulotunga Chola the third. The tides were turning against the Cholas by this time. The peak of Rajaraja and Rajendra had gone. The downslide had started. Sri Lanka had slipped away. Kerala had slipped away. Many of the regions in Karnataka had slipped away. Many areas in Andhra had also slipped away. But Kulotunga Chola was trying so hard. He valiantly defeated the Pandyas. He enlisted the help of a dynasty called the Hoysalas from Karnataka to help in his fight against the Pandyas. Somehow managed to resurrect the Chola power. Even built a wonderful temple in a place called Thiruvalangada, which we will come to. Then we have Rajaraja Chola III, pretty useless king. Rajendra Chola III, the last, 1279. And after this, We will not hear of the Cholas anymore. So what goes up must come down. Throughout the Sangam period, the Cholas were small kings, successful but small kings. Come the time of Vijayalaya, they became a huge, huge power, the 9th century. After that, it was like climbing and climbing and climbing, going from heights to greater heights. Pinnacle was in the 11th century, in the time of Rajaraja and Rajendra. And then a plateau when many of the successors of Rajendra like really held on to what they had, slowly slipped out of their control. And with Rajendra III in 1279, is heard of no more. So now we come to what this lecture is all about. And we come to the reign of Rajaraja Chola I, who has given us probably, I wouldn't be exaggerating if I say that this is probably the one of the grandest temples in the entire world. This Rajarajeshwaram, the deity is called Dakshina Meru, this temple, because the Meru, the great celestial mountain, golden mountain Meru, is in the northern hemisphere. And this is supposed to be the Meru of the south, Dakshina Meru. Remember that Meru was the golden mountain. And this is what Rajaraja tried to do to this temple, to make it the golden mountain of the south. Now, this temple, as we all know, has the tallest Vimanam, that is the superstructure above the main sanctum, to date. It is the tallest Vimanam in the world. And the top part that you see over here, which many people think is a one piece of stone weighing some 70 tons or something, is not one piece of stone. It's several pieces of stone put together. And to cut short another untruth, it is said that the shadow of this temple, this Vimanam, doesn't fall very much. It falls, definitely it falls. Unfortunately, this temple is in a damaged condition. It is not what it was in the time of Rajaraja Chola, because in a couple of invasions, and definitely in one invasion from the north in the 14th century, this part was unfortunately damaged wantonly. This temple, you see, the Gopurams till the time of the Cholas were small, inconspicuous, insignificant structures. From the time of the Cholas, they become slightly bigger, but it is only from this temple that they really become eye-catching. So this is the outermost Gopuram of the Tanjavur temple. And this is, very interestingly, the two Gopurams in the Tanjavur temple have specific names. You just can't call them East Gopuram or West Gopuram, etc. Now, this Gopuram has a name. It is etched in the inscriptions in this temple. This is called the Keralantakan Thiruvasal. For those who in the audience who may not know Tamil, Vasal is entrance. Gopuram is entrance. Thiru is sacred. So Thiruvasal is sacred entrance. And then the one of the titles, famous titles of Rajaraja is foisted on this Gopuram, Kerala Antakan. Kerala Antakan. Two Sanskritam words. He who destroyed Kerala or he who won over Kerala. Now, because no other king from Tamil Nadu till the time of Rajaraja had ever conquered Kerala or even parts of it, Rajaraja was supremely proud of having done this. Not only that, he had destroyed their military academy, Kandalur Salai, as well. And therefore, Keralantakan was one of his titles, and Keralantakan Thiruvasal this was. So this is the Keralantakan Thiruvasal, through which we will proceed to go to the Rajarajan Thiruvasal. Remember, this boy was born, he was christened Arulmozhi Varman. That was the name his parents gave him. Rajaraja was a title which he took after he became the king. And this is the Rajarajan Thiruvasal. Interestingly, both of them are almost completely built out of stone. All stone Gopurams are rare to see. So passing through the Rajarajan and Keralantakan, the Rajarajan Thiruvasal, there is outside a small structure of the Maratha period. We come to the huge Mantapam for the Vahana of Shiva, this Rishabham, which is one of the biggest monolithic ones in, I'm not using the word Nandi. This is not a Nandi. For those of you in the audience who think that this bull in front of a Shiva temple is Nandi, it is not. Nandi is another divine being in Kailash. This is a Rishabha. This is a bull. So this was put there in the Nayak period, one of the biggest monolithic Rishabhas of India. And the original one of Rajaraja's time is in the Prakaram. It's very, very beautiful. I'm not saying the big Nandi isn't, but the small Nandi is so beautiful, very damaged, unfortunately. And look at that stance. This is a very Chola thing to make it look as lifelike as possible. You know, if someone were to come between him and the object of his worship, the Shivalinga, he would definitely bend a little this way to get a glimpse of the Shivalinga, and that's what this Nandi is doing. Anyway, there are lovely Maratha period paintings on the ceiling of the Nandi Mandapa. Almost many of them are unfortunately in a very bad state of disrepair. Now we go to this temple, the Kalasham of which is so tall. I have scanned this from a book by Sri A.K. Seshadri. The lingam in this temple is 1.60 meters in diameter. I'm giving you some statistics. The entire temple was built of approximately 130,000 tons of granite. Tanjavur is flat. You have no mountains, no hills, nothing, hardly any boulders as well. All of this was sourced from the Tiruchirappalli to the Pudukottai area in an arc. The Linga Pita of this lingam, the Avudayar in Tamil, that is made of 6 pieces of stone joined together so perfectly as to look like one piece of stone. The linga height itself is 11.50 feet approximately. Height of the Vimanam is 60.96 meters in 13 tiers. This is a very rare old photograph of the Rajarajeshwaram, Tanjai Periyakovil, Tanjai Perudayar. This is a watercolor painting of the same. And the temple was consecrated in 1010 AD. So says an inscription over here. And in 2010, there was a huge celebration of 1,000 years, and coins and special notes, stamps, special cancellations, etc. were issued to mark this celebration. Now, this is a ground plan of this temple, which again I have scanned from a book by A.K. Seshadri. Just to tell you, the inner Gopuram and outer Gopuram belong to the Chola period, as does the compound wall, which was the donation of Rajaraja's military commander Krishnan Raman. The main Vimanam is, of course, of the time of Rajaraja Chola. What is not of the time of Rajaraja Chola? This Rishabha pavilion is not. The Brihannayaki shrine, incidentally, and this is very interesting, the sanctum of the goddess Parvati in this temple called Brihannayaki is not of the period of the Cholas, not of Rajaraja, not of any of his successors. But the Pandyas, who came back with a vengeance and defeated the Cholas after 1279, around 1279, contributed to the temple of their enemies by building this Brihannayaki sanctum. Ganapati shrine, as we see today of the Maratha period, Karuvur Devar shrine, Karuvur Devar was one of the gurus of Rajaraja, very modern. Subramanya shrine of the Nayak period of 17th century. Nacharaja sanctum is also late. So how much of this temple is actually from the time of Rajaraja Chola? The main parts are Chandikeshwara shrine, definitely is. Now the inner part of this temple, this is engineering at its best. What the Pallavas and the Pandyas left behind as a legacy for the Cholas was taken to heights and greater heights by the Cholas, culminating in this amazing Rajarajeshwaram, amazing, this Dakshina Meru. So the interior is like this. From the top of the lingam, the topmost stone from the inside can be seen. And there is an inner prakaram into which very few people are allowed. And it is between these two massive stone walls. And on the ground level, when one does a pradakshina, you can look at the paintings on either side. I'll show you some of the paintings. It's a painting gallery, literally. And when you do a pradakshina on the upper level above the painting gallery, you have what is called the Karana gallery, which I will explain. This is the Dakshina Meru Vitankar, the great linga of this temple. Now, I accidentally happened to take this photograph one night, many years ago when I was in this temple and it was lit up. It's golden in color, but and I had visited this temple in the time of Rajaraja and his successors and much later as well. This is the color the Vimanam would have looked in the daytime also. because it was completely plated with gold. And that is given in an inscription. So what happened to all that gold? Went away in several invasions. Old pictures of this temple. And these are the paintings on the inner walls of this inner Pradakshina passage that I just showed you. These are all beautiful fresco paintings. This is an Apsara. She's dancing in a pose called the Prishta Swastika. This is again God Tripurantaka, Shiva as a warrior with a bow. And here is the quiver full of arrows over here. Every detail is seen. His eyes are blazing away while you can see that he's smiling. And he defeated 3 asuras in the 3 cities, the sons of Tarakasura. This is again an extremely interesting painting in the same place. This is Rajaraja Chola and his 3 queens worshipping Lord Nataraja in Chidambaram. So if you ask me a question, how do you know that this Rajaraja and 3 queens? It's self-explanatory because this is a tall figure and this has to be the king and the ladies behind him have to be his queens. And how do we know that this is the Nataraja in Chidambaram? First of all, because he was Rajaraja's Kuladevam, family deity. Also because you see, so beautifully have the painters done this. I'm not showing you the full painting, it's just the center part. The golden roof above. You remember I said Parantaka Chola plated it with gold. So the golden roof is shown unmistakably Nataraja of the Chidambaram temple. Now in the Pradakshina passage, above that of the painting gallery, you have the Karana gallery. And as all of you must be knowing, a Karana is not a static dance pose, it's a dance movement. We all know that Dr. Padma Subramaniam, the scholar dancer, has done great work researching on the Karanas of the Tanjavur temple, as also Chidambaram and other temples. And the Archaeological Survey of India have written this. This is the first Karana, Talapushpaputa, as given in the Natya Shastra of Bharata. We must understand that this text was known all over India. What is even more interesting is that we have to understand that when a great scholar called Abhinava Gupta was writing the commentary on this text in far, far away Kashmir, Rajaraja was telling his sculptors and architects to give this Karana gallery over here and put in the sculptures, the carvings of the Karanas in the same order as given in the Natya Shastra of Bharata and in the same order as given in the Natya Shastra of Bharata, with God Shiva dancing in every Karana. So this is the 52, 53, 54, Kunchita, Chakramandala, Uromandala. It is a great contribution of this temple, but unfortunately, they had intended to put in all the 108 Karanas. What happened, we don't know. Work stopped at the 81st Karana and remaining 27 panels are empty. Why his son Rajendra, the great Rajendra, never attempted to finish this series of Karanas, and why all those Chola emperors till 1279 they didn't finish it. The Pandyas who could contribute to Brihanayaki sanctum didn't do that. Why the Nayaks who did so many other things didn't do it, we don't know. Anyway, that's the mystery. Now here you have some of the sculptures on the outer walls. You have Lingodbhava, Shiva as Lingodbhava. You have Shiva as Harihara. You have the great Nataraja. Adavallan is the name that is given. Then you have huge sets of Dwarapalakas. These are all maybe perhaps those Ayudas. Each carries a weapon like this. This is a Trishula. What is very interesting, and here I cannot take any credit for it, this I have heard from a lecture by Dr. Kudavayil Balasubramaniam, a great authority on Chola history, and I'm only repeating his words. Underneath the foot of this Dwarapalaka, you have a snake like a python. And out of the mouth of the python, if you look very carefully, there is an elephant, which you know the size of a normal elephant. You know the size of the mouth of the python that can hold the elephant. You can understand how big then the foot of the Dwarapalaka must be in comparison with the size of the elephant and this python's mouth. If the Dwarapalaka's foot is this big, can you imagine the size of the Dwarapalaka, this row guardian? And can you see what he is doing with his left hand? This is called Vismaya Hasta, astonishment. and he's pointing to the Shivalinga inside, which means you understand the greatness, not literal size, that also is more than 11 feet, but the greatness of the Lord Shiva that is inside. So this is to scale. Great idea, great effort. So this is the outer walls of the Rajarajeshwaram, the Tanjavur temple. And the one god that Rajaraja Chola seems to have liked very much, though there is a dispute as to whether it is this god that's depicted or not, could be Tripurantaka, Lord Shiva as the destroyer of the three cities, depicted time and again, a whole lot of other sculptures and many sets of Dwarapalakas, Uma Sahita Murti, Goddess Durga, etc., etc. The inscriptions in this temple are more than 100 in number, of which more than 60 belong to the time of the Cholas. Majority of the inscriptions are of the time of Rajaraja Chola. A whole lot of information we have of dancers and music, etc., etc. That there were 400 dancers attached to this temple is very clearly given in one epigraph. The payment given to them is also given. All their names are given, and they were given 2 streets with 200 houses on each street, 100 on each side for these dancers to live in. Their names are all very interesting. Some of their names, I just read out some of their names: Rajaraji, Rajakesari, Arulmuri, Kundabai, Arinji, Kannaradevi, Tennavan These are all names reflecting the names and titles of kings and royal women of the Chola dynasty. Many of these dancers have place names. One is Thillai Azhagi because she came from Chidambaram, Thiruvalangadi because she came from a place called Thiruvalangada, Vengadu, Nanguri, Thillai Kutti, Arur. These are various places in Tamil Nadu, and they bear the names of where they came from, and they were transferred from very many temples where they were already working. They are called Tali Pendir. Tali is temple in ancient Tamil, and Pendir are ladies. They were transferred from the temples in which they were already working to this brand new Rajarajeshwaram to dance and to sing and to render very many other services here. You also have the names of 6 dance masters. The dance masters had title Nritta Marayan, Nritta Perarayan. We had 4 directors of dramas, 2 leading players of instrumental music. Their titles are also given. 5 singers, 3 musicians who played on a pipe called the Vangiyam. Then you have 2 musicians who played on the Uduka. The Uduka is the kettle drum like you see in the hands of Shiva. 2 Veena players, 3 people who sang Vedic hymns, 4 people who sang Devaram hymns. The Devarams are the Tamil verses left behind by the Nayanmars or the great Shaivite saints. 2 people who blew the Shangu. Some of the people who blew the conch, the Shangu, came from the army. A huge number of instrumental accompanies for the main singers, etc., etc., etc. So these are some of the parts of the Rajarajeshwaram temple. The Subramanya Swami Sannidhi, beautiful it is inside the campus of the Rajarajeshwaram, belongs to the 17th century Nayak period. These are the Dwarapalakas over there, clearly indicating that I'm running out of time, but just please give me a second. These are some of the Chola bronzes that you have, beautiful bronzes. These are not from the Tanjavur temple. I'm just showing you random Nataraja of the Chola period. But then it's very interesting to know that among all the 66 metal images that were given to this temple, donated in Rajaraja's time, 2 were Adavallans. 2 were metal images of Lord Nataraja that were donated to this temple. And one was repaired in the Maratha period. Now, what is very interesting is 1 metal image of Adavallan, that is Nataraja, was donated by Rajaraja himself. The other was donated by his queen named Chola Madevi. Now, we understand that because the inscription that is given that mentions the donation of Adavallan by Rajaraja is damaged, the inscription by Chola Mahadevi is intact, but the details of the Adavallan given by Chola Mahadevi do not tally with the image that is there in that temple now. Therefore, it is very clear that the image of Adavallan Nataraja that is in worship in the Tanjavur temple today is that donated by Rajaraja Chola the first himself. And this I have taken from a wonderful article written by Padma Bhushan Sri R. Nagaswamy. We go to Gangaikonda Cholapuram very, very quickly. Not many people know that this Gangapuri, this Gangaikonda Cholapuram, was the capital of the Cholas for far, far longer than Tanjavur, for more than 250 years. So we'll have to do a little rethink when we keep saying Cholas of Tanjavur, Cholas of Tanjavur. We say Cholas of Tanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram perhaps. And this city was built from scratch as the capital of the Cholas by Rajendra Chola the first, who transferred it from Tanjavur to this place. Gangaikonda Chola, his military accomplishments outshine his father's. In fact, many of Rajaraja's military accomplishments were because of the input of Rajendra Chola. Very, very quickly will I read this to you. Very quickly, conquered up to Bengal, going through present-day Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Orissa up to Bengal. He conquered the empire of Sri Vijaya, present-day Indonesia and parts of Malaysia. And because of that, he got the title Kadaram Kondan. Kadaram is Kedah in Malaysia till today. Now, why did he suddenly conquer an empire whose emperors had had very cordial relations with his father? That the father had even donated this village of Anaimangalam to sustain a Buddha Vihara built by the Shailendra rulers of Sri Vijaya, because the Sri Vijaya rulers were apparently thwarting the trade of the Cholas with other Southeast Asian countries. So in order to teach them a lesson, Rajendra did this. He also brought entire Lanka under Chola rule. Rajaraja had brought the northern part, that is Iram. Rajendra made almost entire Lanka come under the Cholas. He campaigned against the Chalukyas of Kalyana in Karnataka. He brought the whole of Kerala under Chola rule, but Rajaraja had brought only one part, defeated the Pandyas, defeated the eastern Chalukyas of Vengi, much, many, many more. And I don't have time to go into this now. Anyway, this is very interesting. The Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple was consecrated in 1217 after 85 years. And it was in 2017 after 85 years. Massive stone Vimanam, slightly shorter than that of the Tanjavur temple. But the height of the lingam is much bigger in Tanjavur. And unlike the Tanjavur temple, almost all the sanctums in the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple belong to the time of the Cholas itself. Unfortunately, very, very badly damaged is this parts of this temple. I have good luck of having this old photograph. This is how the inner Gopuram looked, and it's not there anymore. Also very lucky to have this photograph of how this temple looked before it was taken over by the Archaeological Survey of India. It was like this. Very unfortunate, but they put it together again. Temple is now well and alive. Of course, puja was always there. And before I forget, the Tanjavur, the Gangaikonda Cholapuram, and the Darasuram temples, all three are under they are in the list of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and they have the tag Great Living Chola Temples. Great Chola Temples, yes, of course, they're great. Living makes us very, very, very proud, because for so many centuries they've been in active worship. See, this Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple has this concave shape as opposed to the very straight lines of the Tanjavur temple. The very intricate sculptures on the Vimanam and parts of the temple that are damaged. I am going a little fast because I'm lagging behind. The Rishabha of this temple is not the original one. The original would have been of granite, not there today. And this is made of stucco, but very sweet one. Huge Dwarapalakas. There are only a handful of inscriptions in the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple as opposed to the 100 odd in the Tanjavur temple. But what is interesting is one of the inscriptions, and that's not the one that I'm showing you, is from the dynasty of the Gahadabalas. I'm sorry, there's something suddenly stuck. Just give me a second, please. I'm sorry about this. Just give me a second.
Chitra, also you have time, so no need to rush. So
How much time do I have, please?
You go ahead. It's okay.
Thank you so much. I just don't know why it suddenly got stuck.
You can share the folder once again. Yeah.
No, it's not moving. Let me go out.
Just are you able to move your cursor up and down the...
No, I'll stop share and start again. Just give me a second. Suddenly, okay. All right, thank you. Thanks for your patience. I'm sorry about that. So one of the inscriptions, very interestingly, in the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple is from a North Indian dynasty called the Gahadavalas, who were very good friends of Kulothunga Chola the first. And apparently, some members of the family had come here, and an incomplete inscription of this dynasty is seen in this temple. Now, if the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple is known for something, if the reign of Rajendra Chola is known for something, it's these beautiful sculptures. The best of stone sculptures is in the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple, undoubtedly, and nobody will argue with me regarding this. And this is the best of the best. This is Chandesha Anugraha Murti, Shiva blessing his devotee Chandesha. This is a garland, is not a snake. All I want you to see is this, just this. Look at that haram that he wears. Look at the chain that comes above it. Look at his yajnopavitam that goes below it. And look at that tender expression on the face of Shiva looking at his devotee. So much so that he practically ignores Parvati and turns his back to her. And she is also looking very kindly. And she knows that the full attention of her Lord and Master is on that devotee. What a masterpiece! What a sculpture! And this is how it looks. Look at that jata. Look at all the details on it. I mean, who was this anonymous sculptor who made all this? This deer almost leaping out of the hands. After almost 1,000 years, you can see the eyes and the mouth and the ears and the expression on the deer. Oh, and this is the story of Chandesha. I don't have the time to go. This is Chandesha with his axe about to cut off his father's leg. All that is given around, and Chandesha attending to the cows. Opposite is this amazing sculpture of goddess Saraswati in Padmasana. At the steps leading from the three directions into the Garbhagriha of this temple, huge Dwarapalakas. Note the elephant and the python and the foot and the Vismaya Hasta in this temple as well. Goddess Lakshmi is here. But this is the sculpture that I really want to show you. Many of you in this audience are from Tamil Nadu and you may well know about it, but there may be some others who are not from here and not know about it. So I just want to tell you about it. You can just look at this as Nataraja, broken image that has been set right at some point of time and go away. Or you can think again, look deeper and ask why this Nataraja is dancing under a tree. We've never seen Nataraja dancing under a tree. We've only seen Lord Dakshinamurti seated under a banyan tree. But this is a banyan tree and Nataraja is dancing under it. But why? Oh, why? And why? Who is this lady here? Who is this three-legged person here? And going on to the whole big whole sculpture. Who is this lady? What are these Shivaganas? Lots of things, questions. Now, this sculptor, long time ago in Gangaikonda Cholapuram, definitely wanted to depict a Nataraja, and he has depicted one of the best. Look at that smile over here. Amazing stone. Probably one of the best stone Natarajas of the Chola period. One of the best stone Natarajas ever, according to me. Now, this sculptor, for some reason, wanted to portray the Nataraja in another temple, that is in a place called Thiruvalangada, which is 1.5 hours from Chennai by road. Thiruvalangada is a place of banyan trees. It was a forest of banyan trees. The god is called Vataranyeshwara, the lord of the banyan forest. So why he wanted to depict that particular Nataraja, nobody knows, but he wanted to. Therefore, he put a banyan tree there. So Nataraja is dancing under the banyan tree. You must know it is from this place called Thiruvalangada. He also put a sculpture of goddess Kali, because it is in Thiruvalangada that Kali and Lord Nataraja had a dance competition. He also put here a figure of a great lady devotee of Shiva called Karekalamayar, very emaciated looking lady, who is one of the 63 Nayanmars, or the 63 great devotees of Shiva. So all these things combined, Shiva dancing under the banyan tree, the Kali here, Karekalamayar sculpture here, all of them go to show you that this is not any other Nataraja, but the Nataraja called Vataranyeshwarar from the Thiruvalangada temple, very, very, very far away from Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Anyway, there it is. And then Parvati watches him dance. His two sons on their respective Vahanas also watch him dance. Other sculptures from Gangaikonda Cholapuram, amazing sculptures. Brahma with his consorts, Harihara, and this one, not seen in many other places, very rare, Shiva as Kama Dahana Murti, that is burning Kama to ashes. You all know that he burnt Manmata to ashes. So here are Manmata and Rati, unable to stand that third eye opening and the flames coming out of it. Manmata is reduced to ashes, and that's his wife Rati behind him. Amazing. Varaha, Bhuvaraha, Shivaganas, dancers, musicians, what have you in this temple. And it is a place, I don't know why people like this so much. It's a much later, much, very recent addition to this temple. But if you go in between the paws of this lion sculpture, you descend and you come to a well. And it is said that Rajendra poured the waters of the river Ganga. He had sent his army up to Bengal, brought the rivers of the Ganga, brought the waters of the Ganga from there, said to have poured it into this place. But we'll come to that later. Another breathtaking sculpture, carving from the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple is this. It's called the Navagraha Pita or the Surya Pita. And it is believed that he got this as a war trophy, kept it very safely in this temple from the temple, from his campaign against the Western Chalukyas. A forlorn Nandi, having seen Rajendra, not wanting to see us. Now, what we should understand is whether Rajendra poured the waters of the Ganga into that well or not, we don't know. But what he did ask his engineers and his people to build was one of the largest irrigation lakes, largest lakes ever in India. And he called it Chola Gangam, the Ganga of the Cholas. Very close to this temple, nobody even goes to see it. Very little water there now, but a huge, huge effort for irrigation did the Cholas do. You already saw the Veeranarayana Meri, the Veerana Meri. Now this is the Chola Gangam. And a very great poet who composed the Sanskritam part of the Thiruvalangada copperplate inscription, which I showed you, calls this the liquid pillar of victory, this Chola Gangam. He says, generally, when kings won over another land, they put up a stone pillar, and that was a Jayastambam. We won over this place kind of thing. Rajendra didn't do that. Instead of that, he made this lake called the Chola Gangam, and that was his liquid pillar of victory. Beautiful. Now we go to a place called Dharasuram, very close to Kumbakonam. And this was a place called Rajarajapuram. And Rajaraja Chola II, in his reign, this lovely temple was built, also called Rajarajeshwaram. This has a Gopuram. This is the Gopuram that you see at the entrance. However, there was a huge Gopuram, the outer one, which is unfortunately in a very broken state today. This is also an all-stone Vimanam, but compared to the 60.96 meters of Tanjavur and the 54 odd meters of Gangaikonda Cholapuram, is only 25 meters tall, short, in fact, compared to the gigantic ones earlier. This is also one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The greatness of this Dharasuram temple lies in its front mantapa, which is called the Rajagambira Mandapa, which is made to look like a ratha or a chariot. You see, it was around this time in the 12th century that many temples came to be either constructed like chariots or the mandapa at least looking like a chariot. Another good example is the Shangapani temple in close by Kumbakonam, where the main shrine itself looks like a beautiful chariot. That's a Chola workmanship. Now here, the balustrades, that is, as you climb the stairs here, the sides look like elephants. And the whole thing is pulled by horses, the entire chariot. If you read some of the websites, you'll go mad. They'll tell you that the entire chariot is being pulled by horses and elephants. Actually, the elephant is pulling on one side and the horse is pulling on the other. So what will happen to this mandapam, one doesn't know which will win. But anyway, that's not true. The elephants are just carvings on the sides of the stairs, and the two horses are the ones pulling this chariot. Beautifully carved wheels. It's not at all a monolith made of many pieces of stone and beautifully pieced together. And we must understand why this is a 12th century monument. The one in Konark, the famous Surya Mandir, where the entire temple looks like a chariot, was built in the 13th century. And C. Shivarama Murthy, the very great art historian, mentions in one of his books that a queen named Rajasundari of the Chola dynasty was married to a king or a prince of the Eastern Ganga dynasty of Odisha. And with her went this tradition of making a temple look like a chariot. And that's how the Konark temple's tradition came to be. Anyway, this is a Rajagambira Mandapam, for which the Dharasuram temple is so well known. Rajagambira being one of the titles of Rajaraja Chola II. Intricate workmanship. You see, by this time, the Hoysala dynasty in Karnataka had become quite strong, and they were known for their very minute sculptures made of soft stone, chloritic schist, that is, and maybe some of that rubbed off on the Cholas. And here you are, on the ceiling, on the pillars, all of these are Chola gymnasts. And this is the Rajagambira Mandapa from the outside. We climb up this short flight of stairs, and then we look at something very interesting, a sculpture that not many of us would have seen. This is Sharabhamurti or Sharabeshwara, a form of Shiva. Shiva manifested himself to quell the anger of Lord Narsimha, the avatara of Vishnu, half man, half lion. And that is Narsimha dangling from the claws of Sharabeshwara. And Prahlada here, the devotee of Narsimha, praying to Sharaba to release Narsimha. Face of a lion, wings of a bird, 3 pairs of legs, that is 6 legs. That's Sharabhamurti in this temple. Every part of this temple is so intricately carved, and you have a flight of stairs here. And look at the sculptures, all dancers, musicians, etc. I'll be done very soon. Paintings of a different later periods also adorn this temple. What the Dharasuram temple is very other, there are these lovely sculptures of goddess Ganga, Martanda Bhairava, etc. Saraswati. We have sculptures of the Nayanmars. All the 63 Nayanmars, the devotees of Shiva, are here, and their names are also etched. This again, for some reason, has become so famous from the Dharasuram temple. One side you look at a bull, and the other side you look at an elephant. Gymnasts like this, the Gajakesari sculptures, these are the balustrades, sides of the stairs, many dance poses, many Ramayana episodes like Ravana shaking Mount Kailash, etc. The vast outer enclosure of the Dharasuram temple, pierced stone windows, again a hallmark of Chola art, a small Rishabha facing the temple, Chola workmanship. And this is also known, the Dharasuram temple is known for this. Now you tap the sides and they are supposed to produce musical notes, but because they are damaged, unmusical sometimes they are now. And the compound wall of this temple, and the fact that it is still in worship, it's a great living Chola temple, puja still goes on. These are from this temple, but they are now in the Tanjavur Art Gallery. Shiva in his various forms, Gajasamhara Murti. Look at that Chola workmanship, Tripurantaka. And this is a masterpiece. This is a Dwarapalaka which was taken from the Western Chalukyas when the Cholas attacked them. It was kept probably in Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Rajadi Raja, the son of Rajendra, brought this as a war trophy from Karnataka. Must have been in Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Then when the Dharasuram temple was built, it came here, and now it is in the Tanjavur Art Gallery. We go to the final great Chola temple. This is the Kampa Hareshwara temple in Thiruvanam. The original name of this temple was Tribhuvana Veereshwaram, because Tribhuvana Veera was one of the titles of Kulothunga Chola III, perhaps the last emperor who really attempted to bring back the lost glory of the Cholas. This temple is unfortunately not in the UNESCO World Heritage List for various reasons, but it is definitely one of the great Chola temples. Any person who knows Chola history will tell you that. I took this much before the temple was renovated. And as you go through the very, very large and dynamic Chola Gopuram, you see these images of dancers and musicians, which remind you exactly of the eastern and western gateways of the Chidambaram temple. And this is how the Tribhuvana Veereshwaram's Vimanam looks. So like the Rajarajeshwaram in Tanjavur, but much smaller in size. Also closely resembling the Dharasuram temple, it has not only a niche sculpture, niche deity, but a separate sanctum for Sharaveshwara. So much so that it is known as the Sharaveshwara temple. People forget the Shivalingam, that is the main deity, Tribhuvana Veereshwaram, and everything that's Chola, about elephants and training of elephants. Beautiful to look at this flight of stairs with lovely miniature carvings on it. Very much like the Dharasuram temple, but unfortunately not a UNESCO World Heritage structure, and therefore not as well maintained, unfortunately. This is the Tribhuvana Veereshwaram, deserves better. That brings me to the conclusion of this lecture, but I'm not stopping before I tell you that I have done no justice to this dynasty whatsoever. I've only given you resources and the lineage and the Sangam Age and how they became the Imperial Cholas, and of the achievements of the lineage of Vijayalaya Chola. Nilakantha Shastri's great work has done human service to the cause of the Cholas. Maybe in one of his previous births, he must have been some Chola king or Chola minister for him to want to do this work. It's just that they have left behind such a great legacy for us in terms of literature, in terms of inscriptions, in terms of art, architecture, painting, everything. There is a lot more research to be done. Even just the jewelry of the Chola period deserves special treatment. I hope people in this audience will somehow do some more research. So much has been done in the past, but immense scope is still there, and I hope that will be done. And once again, sorry that I've taken so long, but less than this would have done absolutely no justice to the Cholas. Thank you very much, Tamil Heritage, for giving me this topic, something very close to my heart. Thank you all audience for staying with me. Namaskar. Namaste.
Can we have just 2-3 questions before we
sure.
the session for the day? Thank you. One of the standout hallmarks of the the Imperial Cholas is that until that time, there were a whole bunch of small temples that were built all over the place. Aditya, Parantaka, later Sundara Chola, Uttama Chola, everyone had built a lot of small temples. Even Rajaraja starts off with many small temples, right? And at what point does the whole idea of trying to build something which is not anywhere intermediate? I mean, there are all these temples, and then there is the Brihadiswara temple, which has not been better since then, right? So what was that sort of trigger point? Is there something in the history that we can understand that, this is why he started doing that?
Perhaps, as Sri Kalki Krishnamurti had said, seeing the big stupas of Sri Lanka.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps.
The ones in Anuradhapura, you mean?
In Anuradhapura.
Large,
that's right. So, gigantic structures.
Yes.
Maybe he saw them and he said, why should my temples be so small? Let me build something bigger than the biggest.
Yeah. Possibly. I had not read this. I mean, is Kalki saying this in some introduction to his Ponniyin Selvan somewhere?
It's there in the Ponniyin Selvan itself.
Okay.
I've read it 5 times.
I can't recall that. Yeah. So that's a interesting idea. But what happens is that it's not just, if you take a stupa, it's a relatively, I mean, I've seen all the older and the newer Anuradhapura stupas. They're a fairly simple structure. It's a mound, maybe at best gateway. But when you look at the from the South Indian temple architecture evolution, these larger temples have far more complex features that we keep getting, we keep adding to them, such as, for example, the Dharasuram version of it, or for that matter, that of Kulothunga's Melakadambur temple, smaller, built exactly like a Ratha, right?
Correct.
Now, again, do we have something somewhere where there is a trigger point for something like that? Because the temples in their structure, the standard South Indian temple architecture models, remained more or less the same for few hundred years, sort of. And then you see
innovation.
Chola period, a lot of innovations. Again,
it's evolution. It's nothing but evolution. And the fact that the Cholas gave a lot of, I'm not saying the others didn't, but you see, the amount of money the Cholas had at their disposal, no other dynasty in Tamil Nadu had. And they wanted to spend it on art and architecture as well, which is why the best of bronzes, the best of temples, the best of sculptures, and the innovation. You have scores and scores and scores of Chola temples. Each is different. They were trying to do something with the Gopuram or with the plan. Even the Ratha type, none of the Ratha type temples are really same. They may be similar. If you look at the Sangapani Ratha, it's so different from the Tanjavur, from the Dharasuram Ratha. They're each, all the Ratha type temples are different. So that the innovation can happen, experimentation can happen only when that liberty is given to the architect and to the sculptor, and that much of, I put it in black and white, money also.
Right.
With that background, you can ask them to elaborate, experiment, whatever, innovate.
But that also results in a problem, because a small temple, the local community can completely take care of it with their own earnings, not just the building of it, but the upkeep of it right through centuries. But the larger one, you withdraw intentionally withdraw, you just lose it because somewhere a dynasty has to end. Somebody beats you. It could be the Hoysalas and the Pandyas, and then something else happens. Then what happens to these temples? Right? Of course, obviously they wouldn't have thought about it when they were building such huge temples. It's not that, so in a way, if you just step back, the Kanchi Kailasanatha temple was certainly one large, massive temple pre-Rajaraja.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? But then again, post-Rajasimha, that size temples weren't there. And they again started sort of, coming down in size and scale and ambition. And then again, as the wealth goes up, as you say, again, the dream of building something great happens. So that's really, really fascinating, especially when, but there is one thing for all the visitors to Tamil Nadu, right? You take them to a Kailasanatha, you take them to a Bragadishwara, everything else looks puny. Of course, the Nayak Gopurams are always there, but as a temple, nothing can match up to these two.
No, I fully agree. No, the size, the grandeur, completely. So when people ask me, oh, when the Egypt has pyramids, look at those beautiful gigantic. What does your India have? I just tell them, you have the Vedas, and the Vedas tell you, let noble thoughts come to me from every side. I mean, what a lofty, what a great thought, the profound thought. It's lost on them because it's so abstract. You know, they want to see big things.
Right.
Once you've seen the Tanjavur temple, I'm afraid even Gangaikada Cholapuram will seem a little insignificant. Exactly. I'm afraid.
Which is really unfortunate.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you did talk about Pulamangai, which, if one is not really bothered about the grandeur, the size, etc., the beauty of the sculptures and the quality of the miniatures, you cannot, you can't really show two pictures like what you did today to do justice to that.
No.
It will take a few hours to really talk about that.
Absolutely.
Just that temple alone.
Yes.
So, it's like, but however, when we are really talking about the essence of the 9th to, or rather the 10th to the 13th century Cholas, invariably you would have to basically, leaving out, if you have to really cut down everything, it will have to come to these 4 grand Chola temples, including Tribhuvanam.
Completely so. Completely so. Yes. But I still insist the early Chola temples are gems, and people who don't visit them are definitely losing out on something.
So that way, we have a surfeit of, if you really take the Chola Desa, there's just too many to see. And a single curated tour will simply not do justice to them at all.
One lifetime simply will not do justice.
Yeah, which is when some of the readers pointed out when you were giving a list of reference books at the beginning. We're talking about S.R. Balasubramanian's the volume of Chola temples as something that you didn't mention as one of the things that they talked about.
And I mentioned only Shastri.
Right.
Yeah, SRB's books are definitely great works, as is the pinnacle of the other one by his son, B. Venkatraman, and the book on Chidambaram by his other son, Sri B. Natarajan. Great contributions. No, there are other books also. Sadashiva Pandaratar's book. I didn't mention all these things.
Right.
1 hour, Chola.
Yeah, I know. So we wanted to sort of set the ball rolling with the Cholas, and now every day starting now for the next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, we have 10 more, 8, 10, 12 more lectures covering the whole of India, and we would like to keep coming back to this lecture in terms of the actual monuments themselves. So from the south, we are now going on to Pandyas, and then from there on to each of the dynasties. It's going to be really interesting for the rest of the days. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. There's so much more to talk about, but let's just stop and end with this fantastic note. Let me invite Kishore to close the day's proceedings. Thank you, Dr. Chitra.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra. From the lithic inscriptions to coins to the copper plates to the temples themselves and sculptures, mention of the kings and the Chola lineage. I think it was a wholesome treat of Chola and Chola. Thank you very much once again. On that note, we end today's program. Tomorrow, we have 2 very interesting lectures. We have first up at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time, we have architect Sita Raman, who is going to talk about the Pandya art, the later Pandya art, and the variations that it had from the Pallavas and Chola. So he was a speaker at one of our Pecha Kacheris. So first up, we have Sita Raman talking about the Pandya art. From there, we go to the Gurjara Pratiharas, where Dr. Manjari Balera will be talking about the Pratiharas art, particularly in central and northern India. So we have two exciting lectures coming up tomorrow. Please do join us. The program starts at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time tomorrow. Thank you for your participation today. We look forward to your presence tomorrow.